Welcome, dear listener, to another slow unfolding of history told in the quiet tones of the night. Tonight we walk into the deep forests of Eastern Europe, where snow falls like a curtain, slow and patient, and where Slavic villages survived winter not through haste, but through rhythm, ritual, and the stubborn warmth of human community here. In wooden homes where smoke curled from chimneys like long whispers, families gathered against the cold. The oaks and pines stood as guardians, sheltering paths packed by sleds and feet. Food was stored, firewood was stacked, and stories were told beside the stove as wolves howled just beyond the light. This journey is not one of battles or kings, but of hearths and hands, of bread baked in silence, and of quiet survival written in frost. Let the slow weight of snow soothe your mind. Breathe with the pines, listen to the creak of ice, and drift as if you, too, were resting in a village that waits for spring with patience. And before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, I invite you to subscribe, so that you may return again and again to the gentle histories that help you sleep. Night gathers early, and the pech becomes a stage. Its bricks hold the day's warmth like a memory told back to the room, and around that red-shouldered heart the village's oldest craft, story, goes to work mending what cold frays. Lamps are trimmed low. Wool clicks once or twice and then rests. A pot gives one last agreeable sigh. Children arrange themselves in rings inside rings, heads finding pillows of folded sleeves, eyes practicing the art of staying open while surrendering to comfort. The teller is not always the oldest, but the voice always carries age, rounded vowels that have rolled down many winters, consonants sanded by kindness. A palm strokes the stove's warm brick once, the way a fiddler tunes a single string, and the first sentence arrives like bread lifted from an oven, plain, fragrant, sufficient. There was a year, it begins, when the road to the mill forgot itself for a week. No kings tonight, no cities. The protagonists are a mare with more sense than her rider, a baker whose luck was shaped like patience, a river that chose mercy at the last minute. Elders tell weather-like genealogy. The great snow of whatever year is not a boast but a branch on the family tree. Everyone in the room is descended from that drift somehow. We measured it on the broom, someone says, and the broom was ashamed. Laughter wakes without jostling sleep. The stove punctuates with a pop where resin remembers summer. In these stories, hunger and fear walk through the door, sit by the fire, and leave warmed enough to behave. Folktales wear winter like a coat that fits too well to feel like costume. A fox flatters a crow into dropping a rind. A bear borrows a pot and returns it doubled. A house spirit tidies when thanked and tangles when ignored. Children mouth the turns before they arrive, pleased to meet inevitability. The moral lands softly, never barbed, praise the hand that needs. Don't mock small luck, keep salt near bread. Leave a little porridge for the latecomer even if you think none will come. There are cautionary scraps, trimmed to village size. Fire that was fed too fast sulked and collapsed. A man who bragged about his axe swung into a knot and learned humility from the ringing in his hands. A sled that rushed the corner kissed the well with its nose and apologized with labor the next day. No one is shamed by name. The stove lets the lesson rise without sticking. Children read their own small guilt in the steam and feel forgiven enough to try better. Songs visit between tales the way snow visits between winds, brief, soft, making everything glow a shade different. A lullaby counts geese folding into reeds. A round praises the bright patience of embers. A harvest hymn is borrowed and slowed until it becomes a winter hymn about hands, not sheaves. The room hums. The smallest mouths open and close like fish in sleep. Drinking melody, objects become actors. A wooden spoon, lifted, becomes a stag's antler. A shawl's corner, flicked, makes a river. A ladle's shadow on the wall is a wolf who learns manners. The storyteller's hands do more work than their voice, pinching the air to make a door, spreading fingers to show a field, drawing a small circle that everyone understands is a bowl set aside for a guest. Children's eyes track these cartographies. Tomorrow their play will remember every gesture. Between stories, the kettle drizzles a clear thread of sound. Cups answer with clinks mild as snowflakes landing on each other. A slice of rye travels hand to hand, rubbed with garlic for courage or brushed with honey for comfort. The last bite is saved, almost always, for someone not present. For the one on the road, the grandmother says, and a child solemnly places the crust on the windowsill, where night makes it look important. The stove itself has legends. Once it baked a loaf so fine the priest forgot his sermon and preached on bread alone. Once it kept a calf alive through a week of storm when the barn roof sulked. The calf grew to a cow that let children pull her tail without plotting revenge. Once, a crack opened in the corner brick and a boy pushed a coin into it and wished. The crack was mended, but the wish kept shining, and the boy grew into a man who mended things for a living. The stove accepts these with the dignity of a saint embarrassed by miracles. Ghost stories are winter spice, but they are measured like cinnamon, just enough to warm the edges of the room. A light seen near the old birch that turned out to be a lantern tied by wind. Footsteps on the roof that, in thaw, proved to be icicles choosing their departure. A knocking at the window when no one stood outside, which later was explained by the cat's tail and a pot lid conspiring in the dark. Fear is invited, fed, and sent home with a scarf. From time to time, a story steps outside and returns wearing today's coat. The errand that took longer than it should because the path drifted. The neighbor who showed up with a jar when your shelf looked thin. The cow that refused to cross the ice until the moon rose, and then marched like a general. The room nods. Myth and morning are cousins. The child who has been fighting sleep gives in, confident that heroes look like people they know. When the last tale shortens its sentences, the stove lowers its voice to match. Ash settles into a comfortable map. Coals find a deep red the eye loves. The storyteller's hands fold. Wool sighs back into baskets. A door opens and closes once, softly, the breath of night beckoning. Children are carried or steered to bed. Elders stand a moment longer, hearing the day retell itself more gently than it lived before the lamp is pinched. Someone draws a small sign in the steam on the window, often nothing more than a dot and a line, a star, a road. The sign will be gone by morning, absorbed back into glass like a story absorbed into bone. But it will have done its work. Sleep arrives along it, steady as a sled on a well-pressed track, and the house drifts into the kind of darkness that has room for dreams without drafts. Between the forest and the village there is a measured space, neither line nor fence, but a courtesy. Wolves keep it by instinct and experience. People keep it by memory and prudence. Winter sharpens the agreement. Food grows thin in the dark months. Breath shows itself. Sound carries too far. Yet most nights pass with only the knowledge of the other. A track discovered in morning, a low note on the edge of hearing. A pause neat signature at the road that turns toward barns but does not enter. The wolf step right spare prose. 4 ovals, direct, a ruler's logic in the stride. No flurry at the edges. No wasted commas. In fresh snowfall, the prints look almost ceremonial, as if the animal had dressed in white gloves to pass the town politely. The elders read this script with a finger held an inch above the page. 2 adults, 1 yearling. No limp, bellies not desperate yet. They nod, and chores continue with 1 extra hinge oiled, 1 doorbar tested, 1 lantern set a little closer to the barn path at dusk. Distance becomes a sense more than a measure. The wolf's voice, when it comes, is not threat before it is geography. A long call maps the hills. A second voice climbs the tune from a ridge where wind hesitates. A third answers lower, perhaps near the frozen river where reeds stand like an audience. The village listens and contemplates the weather of hunger. Children pause over bread. Dogs lift heads, then return snouts to paws. The stove hums, indifferent and faithful. The song ends, and the night feels larger, but not less safe. Light is a language both sides speak. The village hangs lamps at corners where snow drifts into unwelcome architecture. The glow is modest, amber rather than glare, enough to say, here is habitation. Here are hands. Pass us by with the dignity we will keep for you. In deep winters, a haunch is left on a stump beyond the fields. Quiet diplomacy from men who understand arithmetic. Better to pay the border than to fight in the courtyards. The gift is not a surrender. It is an invoice stamped paid in meat and respect, Dogs are ministers at this frontier. They know the difference between fox mischief and wolf inquiry. Their voices are paragraphs. A low paragraph means presence at distance. A sharp, brief paragraph means curiosity closer than it should be. People answer with presence, not panic. Footsteps in snow, a lantern lifted, the steady punctuation of a human cough. Wolves dislike punctuation. They prefer the long sentence of dark. Often that is enough. The prints arc outward, the night resumes its business, and hens dream without interruption. There are stories of winters when the treaty tore. A thaw crusted into razors. Deer moved like ghosts too far west. A litter failed. The river lied and swallowed a hunter's luck. Then the grey shapes approached the hedges, and men walked every path with bells on sleds and long poles that made them larger than one body. Children were brought in early and told tales made of patience rather than fear, of a mare whose stance warned a yard before eyes saw, of a grandmother who sang while throwing warm water across a threshold to confuse a nose, of a baker who fed the churchyard with scraps all winter and was never troubled. The point was not heroism. It was method. Method begins with barns that think. Doors lower to kiss thresholds so no draft writes an invitation. Boards are tight. Knots are watched. A latch that rattles in the day becomes a liability at night. Straw is piled where hooves cannot slip into panic. A hook on a beam holds a lantern at the right height to make shadows honest rather than sinister. The smell of man, sweat, wool, soap, lingers in corners on purpose. Wolves are mathematicians, add labor to light descent, and they move the equation a mile outward. The forest is mathematician, too. When snow is deep and powdery, wolves are taller than they look, their shoulders cutting a channel the way boats cut leads in thin ice. When crust forms, they run on top and become faster than any hope a man can carry in his legs. People plan accordingly, errands early. Routes that follow the village's gentle curves rather than the forest's straight temptations. A staff carried not as weapon but as third foot, the extra beat that tells an approaching shadow the walker is not alone. Children are taught the border the way they are taught fire, without drama, with rules that feel like games. Do not carry meat in a way that drips a comma of scent down the lane. Do not run out of sight at dusk. Do not practice bravery where it would make your mother foolish. Learn the posture of large, a coat spread, a broom lifted, a shout that sounds like three throats at once. Learn, too, the posture of small, stillness in a doorway with lamp behind, making your outline a house, not a head at eye in the hunt's deep hours. Wolves pass like thoughts the mind does not own but recognizes. Their fur catches frost at the tips, a silver that belies strength. Their eyes are not lanterns. They are wells with ice on the rim. They look at the village as people look at the forest, with a hunger that is mostly respect, with a calculation that has learned the price of mistakes. One steps onto the pond and tests the grammar of ice. It holds a degree, then throws back a sentence in a low one. The wolf decides against rhetoric, returns to reeds, and the night's syntax improves. Traps are not set near homes. The village, if it must take wolves, takes them in honesty, far in, where tracks are old and stories older. A man who comes back with a pelt does not boast. He folds it furin, snow off, and speaks of prints, wind, luck, and sadness. The children touch the animal's ear and say thank you, not because someone insists, but because the ear is beautiful and they are decent. Often the pelt stays long in a chest before becoming collar or trim. Use is not rushed. Gratitude is, sometimes the distance closes by grace. A winter birth surprises a herd of deer near the fields. Wolves watch and do not press. Men watch and do not intrude. For 1 hour, the border is held by 4 sets of eyes that have sworn nothing aloud. The doe rises. The fawn finds legs. The pack turns away first. When the story is told by the stove, it sounds like a fairy tale that forgot to include magic. Yet everyone sleeps better for it, as if reminded that survival is a choir, not a solo. Spring will erase evidence quickly. Prints blur. Howls go south into hills where green softens everything into forgiveness. But the memory of winter etiquette lingers in the village like a proverb. Tend your thresholds. Share cleanly. Look large when you must and small when you should. Do not be delicious by accident. Wolves teach this without teaching. Their distance is a mirror that shows people their own edges, where fear ends and prudence begins, where possession ends and stewardship begins. On certain bright nights, when the moon peels an orange of light and lays its segments across the fields, the wolves sing again. It is not for the moon. It is for each other, and for the space that allows them to be plural without being crowd. The village listens and feels, without shame, a small pride in keeping its side of the treaty. Lamps are lowered, doors latched, ashes spread, dogs curled, children named by name across rooms, not as alarm, but as inventory. The song travels over roofs and chaff and the well's thick lid and the pond's black grammar. And it does not stop at any heart, it does not need to stop at .by morning. The only proof may be a line of neat ovals evolving into a field's edge. The snow will hold those prints until light grows rude and softens them. An elder will stand, squint, nod, and say what counts. They passed. It will mean, the distance held. The contract remains. We did our work. They did theirs. Then the day begins, bread, wood, well, barns, and the border resumes its patient labor, as natural and as crafted as the path between pines or the curve of smoke above a good stove. When the river decides to hold its breath, the village earns a second road. It doesn't happen in a day. First come collars of ice at the banks, lace that pretends to be strength. Then plates drift down like slow shields, kissing and separating, practicing their future. Finally, after a long night that tightens every hinge on every door, the surface goes quiet from bend to bend. In morning, people step out and listen. The river speaks a new language, a low, travelling whum underfoot, a thin, glassy chime where the wind knits snow into the cracks. No one claps. They test with poles and prudence, and the first crossings are small, respectful. Paths lay themselves over the white like handwriting on a clean slate. Toward the mill's far track. To the willow stand where baskets begin as winter twigs. To a neighbor otherwise 2 hills away. Sled runners answer in a bright, satisfied SKR, different from forest snow, more like the note of a saw that has met true grain. Children feel taller on this new plain. Dogs trot with diplomatic dignity, nails ticking like metronomes. Somewhere under the ice, water continues its old conversation, ignored kindly by those above who have errands to stitch from village to village. Fishing returns through doors cut with augers. Circles open to black, a little breath of steam shrugging up like a secret told to air. A man kneels, mitten hand on the rim to read the current, line lowered with bait plain as hunger. In good minutes, a silver body answers the cold with a flick like a small lightning. Fish laid on snow glaze in their own armor, clean and bright. In lean minutes, men share sun and silence, trading proverbs in low voices. Hook remembers a patient hand. Ice listens if you do. A boy learns that the whole is a teacher who does not raise its voice. Bridges of winter need maintenance. Snow drifted wrong becomes a trap. Someone shovels a swath wide enough for a neighbor's courage. Sand is scattered where feet cued yesterday made glass of the surface. A bee room's bristles draw lanes for skates, for sleds, for boots, each with its own politeness. Where a spring tugs at the ice's belly and thins it to treachery, reeds are left uncut on purpose, flags in pale winter green that say, pass inland. The river appreciates accurate signage. It answers with fewer arguments. Work travels easier over the frozen water. Firewood rides farther on a smaller breath. A half pig from a cousin's smokehouse sways respectfully on a sledge, covered in linen that remembers summer wind. Barrels of sour cabbage trade banks. Honey changes hands in jars wrapped in straw. A bundle of rushes for a thatch repair skims like a boat in a story. People nod to strangers from upriver as if greeting kin from a branch of the family tree that grew out of sight but under the same weather. Not everything that moves should. The ice has moods. At noon, sun persuades it to talkative cracks, long white sentences that write themselves across the plain just ahead of a walker's boots. Elders smile. This is only language. Step steady. At Thor's flirt, Water blushes under a skin that still looks trustworthy. The right choice is retreat and tea. The rule is primitive and perfect. If listening grows difficult, change your plan, skates rehearse joy. Leather straps, laced with mitten stubbornness, draw a bright grammar under children whose knees can't decide if they are birds or foals. The first lap is courage. The second, laughter. The third belongs to speed. A father, who once fell here and learned humility, glides a small steadying circle around a child whose ankles argue. The river allows elegance for a quarter hour each day and then calls everyone back to human caution with a low, profound boom from under the bend. Gifts have measurements. Gratitude is a warm scarf.at the far edge. Willow and alder listen more closely to winter than do men. Willows keep green tucked in tight kidneys along twigs. Women cut them and pretend not to smile at April hidden in January. Bundles tie with the authority of future baskets, future fish traps, future fences mended before lambs begin to test the world's boundaries. The river's bank, reading this industriousness, approves by staying still until the ties are done. Night on the ice is another country. Lanterns walk in pairs like cautious stars. The surface reflects and doubles them until the plain looks threaded with constellations. Footsteps sound inside the foot, as if the ice had moved hearing from air into bone. A fox tests a crossing, towing the edge with accountant seriousness. A man with a pole watches and decides to choose the footbridge instead, wisdom borrowed from a rival professional. At the village, lamps on corner posts mark the exit and the return like punctuation. 2 commas to leave, a period to come home. The river is also church and threshold. On the winter feast of water's blessing, holes are cut in the shape of a cross. Pine boughs crown the curb. Breath gathers in halos above heads. The priest's voice carries a warm ribbon across the cold expanse. His hand dips evergreen in water that says nothing and says yes. People touch brows, cheeks, wrists. Some will break the surface and come up whooping. Others will press fingers to the black mirror and believe they have done enough. The ice accepts every form of courage without comment. In late season, the plain loosens. Snow darkens where undercurrent thinks about April. Edges rot first, banks crumbling like old bread. The village edits its routes back to earth, planks thrown across umber seams, errands rerouted to the hill road. Last fishing holes retired with a blessing in the form of a spoon of vodka poured to the river's mouth. Dogs choose higher ground before men do. Children stomp slush and declare it spring, which it isn't, but their declaration helps. When breakup comes, it is both crisis and spectacle. The first day is modest, an opening here, a floating plate there, the creek at the bend speaking faster. Then a night of rain or a day of sun writes urgency into the current. The plain shatters into fleets. Ice rides ice. Logs freed by sore and patience in autumn now raise their hands to travel. People stand on banks with poles ready to save what should not go. Ladders, barrels, the reputation of offence, and to let go what must. The river, released from grammar. Hums in prose again. By summer. Crossing means bridge or ford. And the winter road is a rumour turned souvenir. Flattened grass where the ramp met shore. A willow stump cut cleaner than the others. A child's certainty that the pond once had streets. But in the pantry, jars of fish in clear jelly gleam like kept promises. And in the mind's pocket, the memory of skating under blue that was both sky and ice remains calm as a coin. The river's winter becomes a measure for other risks. Listen first. Test with the pole. Accept joy in the right dose. Retreat when the sentence underfoot changes tense. Until then, cold deepens, and the second road holds. A woman carrying milk crosses to the far bank without hurrying. A man with a borrowed saw returns it with thanks that steam when he speaks. A child drops to his stomach to peer into a fishing hole and sees his own surprised face gazing up from another season. The village, laced together by this sudden geometry, walks lighter for a while. Underneath, water keeps the year moving forward. Above, people keep the winter from standing still. Markets in winter are brief hearths laid out beneath the sky. They bloom where roads agree to meet, a wind-calm hollow between barns, the lee of the church with its belfry rhymed in sugar, the open square tamped flat by a week of sled runners. Before daylight quite remembers color, tents wake like cautious mushrooms, canvas flaps tied back, poles creaking polite sentences, a line of lanterns making amber islands on blue snow. From the village and from the farther woods, people arrive in strings, sleds whispering, bells low and kind, dogs trotting with the grave excitement of diplomats. Stalls are not walls. They are arrangements. A plank on 2 barrels becomes a kingdom of rye loaves with crackling crowns. Next door, a honey seller arrays jars like captured afternoon, straw apt for travel, bare for pride, wax discs sealing summer under thumbprints. A cooper has set a small barrel on its side so customers can thrum it and hear the note of tight staves. Clear means water will stay. Dull means char for fish. No shame there. A basket maker displays circles of willow green and willow grey. Each weave a patient argument the hands can read before the mind translates. Smells stitch the lanes together. Steam rises from a samovar like a clever girl's braid. Tea with lemon whispers of ships and southern orchards. A pan hisses with slices of sausage shingled on onions. Dill wakes sleepy noses. A plate of pickled mushrooms holds the entire forest politely on a fork. Bread is broken into ideas. Heel for the old, centre for children, a crust pressed to the hand of a woman who has arrived after a longer road than anyone mentions aloud. Haggling is winter's soft sport. Voices stay low. Cloth prefers modesty in cold air. The wool remembers a good sheep, a woman says, letting a shawl spill over her forearm where lamp and frost can judge it. And a good washer, the seller answers, who did not hurry. Coins are counted in gloves, warmed in pockets, released with reluctant but cheerful clicks. Many bargains require no metal, a string of dried apples for a clutch of candles, a morning helping at the smoker for a repaired latch, a song promised at a wedding for a bolt of linen with a border brave enough for a bride. Children measure the market differently. They make inventories of delights, a carved whistle that imitates a night bird, a wooden horse with a tail of flax, a sugar rooster on a stick, amber red, comically proud, destined to break and be mourned and licked anyway. They remember stalls by animals, the place where the good dog sleeps under the bench, the place where the cat watches everyone as if tallying sins, the place where the hens in a crate stare like critical aunts and are nonetheless admired. Their pockets bulge with untranslatable wealth, 2 chestnuts, a button, a ribbon end, a stone that looks like a potato. Music keeps the market's pulse. A fiddler tunes his instrument with breath blown gently into the pegs. A dulcimer sprinkles brightness like a handful of frost caught and shaken. A drum remembers to be supportive and not vain. Songs are drawn at a winter tempo, lilt without rush, bounce without boasting. People step in place rather than dance. The ground appreciates being flattered, not stabbed. Every so often, a round begins about a kettle that boiled too fast and learned manners. Even the sternest seller smiles. The river road contributes strangers, and news arrives under fur trim. From upriver, the miller's new stone is truer than his last. From downriver, the bridge has sulked, walk the bank's inside curve. A woman from 3 villages away produces cloth dyed with a black so respectable it gleams blue. A man with a sled of salt speaks the quiet authority of someone who knows what soup owes him. If disagreements appear, they are folded into tea. The rule is simple. Do not send a quarrel back home snug on your sled. Make it walk away on sore feet. Weather edits commerce. When wind lifts its tired argument, stalls pull inward until the lanes narrow into intimacy. Scarves rise, voices fall. The samovar's breath looks like a saint's halo. When sun leans, ice turns sly. A boy sands the worst corner with the solemnity of a priest, and the crowd blesses him with coins that will become a whistle by noon. Snow begins to ornament hats, lashes, horse manes. Laughter lifts from a deeper pocket in the chest, as if warmth is keeping score and winning. Every market has its small theatre. A tinker repairs a pot that has served 3 generations. He taps and listens, then hands it back as if returning a story. A toothless elder tells fortunes with playing cards softened to velvet by 100 winters. The fortunes are all about patience and careful shoes. A widow shows mittens knit in a pattern inherited from an aunt who learned it from a travelling woman who knew a sea. The pattern looks like waves that never saw salt. A child reads this as magic. So do the grown food chooses the hour. At mid-morning, buckwheat pancakes steam in stacks. Sour cream stands as firm as certainty. Someone has brought cloudberry jam and a line forms as if for a blessing. At midday, stew appears in bowls that burn fingers without apology. Bread soldiers dive and return victorious. At afternoon's edge, with shadows lengthening and purses thinner, sweets gather the last coins. Popperseed rolls like dark galaxies. Sugar on the lips a promise that the walk home will seem shorter. The market is also a registry of mercy. A woman who cannot come sends a list and a basket. 3 neighbors conspire to fill it and undercharge. A man who lost a pig in the thaw receives sausage not because anyone pities him, but because the season does not permit accounts too far out of balance. The priest buys nothing and leaves with a heavier sled. He will preach gratitude later and mean it in the arithmetic sense. When the bell in the belfry shakes out its last light, stalls begin to fold. Goods tuck into sacks like geese repluming. Coins clink into boxes. Runners are checked, lashing snugged, dogs counted, children captured and inventoried. Promises are shouted across the new empty. Your latch is tomorrow, the wool by Sunday. Bring jars next time. I'll fill them. The ground reveals the day's footprints and begins to erase them with a slow, impartial hand. Homeward, sleds move like low constellations across the plain. The market's warmth travels in portable forms. A hot stone wrapped in cloth for the lap, a mitten baked against a teacup, a song caught in the ear that insists on being hummed past the last fence. At doorways, lamps welcome with their square of gold. And the peck breathes out, as if it had been waiting to hear the day's receipts not in money but in stories. By night. The square is simply snow again, tamped and truthful. A stray ribbon end, a single seed of dill, a circle of ash where tea talked, signs that trade and courtesy visited and left without injury. In the pantry, jars have new neighbors. On the peg, a shawl with a border that looks like a river. By the stove, a pot whose bottom is round again, ready to teach tomorrow's stew how to be grateful. Winter markets are proof that warmth can be public. For a few hours, hunger, craft, gossip, and kindness stand in lanes and pretend the world is easy. The act is convincing, not because it lies, but because it concentrates truth, that people, arranged well, are a kind of fire that needs no chimney. Winter's backbone is made of quiet tasks that never ask for applause. In Slavic villages, women bend the season into kindness with hands that count stitches, measure flour by weather, and make minutes multiply. Their work is not a spectacle. It is a steady river that keeps the house floating when snow argues against motion. Morning begins with inventory disguised as care. A shoulder checks the peck's warmth. A palm tests yesterday's dough sleeping under linen. Eyes read the windows for us to guess the day's will. Fern, feather, spear. Water is portioned the way a careful voice portions news. First for tea, then for porridge, then for washing. A shawl ties behind the head, knotted without mirror, the motion practiced so deep it feels like thought, and the day opens, spinning is winter's quiet drum. By the stove shoulder, a drop spindle whirls, then climbs to a humming wheel. Wool drafted from carded clouds grows into a line consistent enough to be trusted. The thumb and forefinger learn diplomacy between twist and draft. Stories travel in the rhythm. How Aunt's shawl pattern was learned from a traveller. How the war took away wheat and left ingenuity. How the river once froze thick enough to carry a cart and an ox and a man's promise across at dusk. Yan wins. Time softens. A skein feels like a small moon, weaving arranges that moon into something the day can wear. A narrow ground loom by the window answers the room with small clacks. Warp tight, weft generous. The shuttles pass an editing of colour into sense. Bands for belts and sled lashings. Towel lengths with borders like fences and streams. A table runner that will remember this winter each feast day hence. Patterns are not merely pretty. They are mnemonics, a domestic script that says, this edge holds, this center breathes, this border keeps warmth inside, cloth returns to skin by way of needles. Darning socks is a conversation with time. Mushroom, needle, thread. A honeycomb of small interlacings that scold no one and save everything. A patch goes onto a coat elbow like a leaf on late wind. The shade is close but not exact. Honesty stitched visible so pride doesn't return as draft. Baby shirts, linen, then wool, grow by careful increments. Buttonholes are cut and hemmed with attention that knows the child's fingers will fumble only once before learning to thank the hand that made the hole true. Food is engineered warmth. Grains rinse in 3 waters. Beans are soaked while lamps burn low. Cabbage emerges from brine to meet onion and fat and becomes supper's architecture. A pot is placed not at the peck's mouth but at its intelligent shoulder, where heat behaves like a tutor, firm, patient, thorough. Bread rises, is knocked down, rises again, proof that persistence is an ingredient. Salt is pinched high, so it falls like snow rather than clumps like scald, preserves a winter's choir. Cranberry jewels brighten plates, mushroom caps return autumn to tongues, honey is spooned like a remedy for disheartened air. A jar is opened with a cloth's twist and a prayer's brevity. Its pop is applause for the woman who thought of February while September still smelled green. A saucerful is set aside for a sick neighbor. A spoonful is set on the window for those who pass in the night and cannot knock. Cleaning in winter is choreography against damp and dust. Floors are swept toward the door as if ushering gloom outside. Rugs are hung and beaten to make sunlight visible. Ash is sifted fine for scouring, because even soot can be an ally when asked politely. The stove's mouth is brushed. The brick is wiped with a rag that keeps the scent of soap and summer. Copper is convinced to remember its own shine with a lemon kept for such arguments. The house glows, not bright, but honest. Care is counted in small mercies. A scarf is retied on a child who thinks bravery means necks don't feel cold. A cow's flank is rubbed where winter makes a map of bones. Warm water is carried to hens as if delivering good gossip. A husband's silence after a hard hunt is spared questions and given a bowl. Elders are seated in the warm geography of the room, not too close to the draught, not too far from light, a cup placed where the hand doesn't have to search. The grammar is anticipate, then soften, letters are written on long nights, ink thick, words practical, tenderness folded between lines like a second paper. To a sister upriver, we have enough. The cabbage sings. The stove behaves. Come when the roads agree. To a son in town, your hat needs a better seam. It is enclosed. Do not argue. To a widow across the lane, the jar is for you. Do not return the jar. The post is a sled and a boy's swift feet and a woman's relief set free into air, ritual make-waits the days. Icons are dusted with a feather. Evergreens tied with red thread decorate corners where drafts turn kind. A pinch of salt is drawn into a cross on a loaf before the knife decides where to enter. On feast eves, the tablecloth is the one with a border of wheat, ironed smooth with a flat heated on the stove's back. Plates are arranged in even grammar. A chair is left for the guest fate might send. The room learns hospitality the way children learn letters, by repetition, not lecture. Women hold the village's memory of proportion. Enough is their favorite word, spoken without sting. Enough wood for today, but not tomorrow's greed. Enough sugar for tea, but not for waste. Enough scolding to steer without bruising. Enough work to sleep well. This temperance is not modesty. It is engineering. Houses do not hold through winter on fire and muscle alone. They hold because someone measured thoroughly and chose sanity over spectacle die in the pauses between tasks. They are luxuries that look like survival. A shawl is spread to admire its honest border. A song is hummed low while the kettle thinks. A window is opened a hand's width to let pine in and steam out. A girl is taught to thread a needle by lamplight and then, immediately, to rest her eyes on snow until the focus becomes gentle again. A neighbor steps in with news. Tea is poured as if it were antidote. When sleep comes, it is earned without heroics. Garments hang where dawn can find them. The bowl is set where morning won't stumble. A pot soaks, a spoon dries, a floor keeps its own counsel. The stove hum lowers. Outside, frost rehearses its ferns. Inside, blankets hold a warmth that has been braided all day through dozens of unremarkable decisions. If children dream, they dream of bread that always rises and paths that never drift shut and mittens that do not get wet unless laughter required it. The work of women is winter's architecture made visible, heat arranged, food extended, fabric persuaded, time managed into grace. In the sum of these quiet labors, the season stops being an adversary and becomes a framework. Spring will arrive and scatter the ledger into planting and mud. But when it comes, it will find a village intact because women kept January from becoming louder than the human voice. Night in winter is not only longer, it is wider. It asks the village to fill it with something kinder than worry and stronger than silence. Songs do that work, stitched from breath and memory, warmed over the peck like bread, carried from house to house as easily as a lantern. They begin when chores have folded and the kettle has agreed to. Sing. Someone lifts a note with the modesty of a person opening a door and standing aside for others to enter. There are songs that keep rhythm for hands. A flax-spinning chant with a soft heel tap, a weaving tune that measures shuttles pass, a darning hum that makes small stitches braver. The melody does not compete with work. It aligns it. Pull, place, turn. The song says in its own language, and the cloth becomes less stubborn. Children, pretending to ignore, match the pitch before they know they've learned it. And their fingers find steadier courage in the last light. There are songs that put children to sleep without humiliating the day that tired them. A lullaby counts geese, one by one, bedding down in reeds. The refrain arrives like a hand at the brow, neither heavy nor absent. Another whispers about a road that will be safe in morning. It does not promise more than it can keep, only that morning exists and knows their names. The stove approves, lowering its hum until it becomes a vast, slow drum. Men have their winter tunes, low and practical. A sledding song that keeps steps even and breath rationed. A woodcutter's two-note call that keeps axes arriving on the same beat so logs accept their fate without splintered argument. A traveller's verse, built in fours, that shortens distance by filing it into tidy drawers. No one sings to impress. This is carpentry for lungs. Feasts raise the key but not the volume. A Christmas carol enters like good company. Old words, newer harmonies, a star riding the line between roof and sky. Voices braid, the grandmother's reed, the father's oak, the child's silver. Even those who cannot carry a tune carry the room, soft consonants, an O at the right moment, a hum that aligns like a joint set true. Candlelight finds eyes and makes the song look warm as well as sound so. When the market gathers, music becomes a public hearth. The fiddler tunes to the temperature of the day. The dulcimer sprinkles frost. The frame drum keeps heartbeats from hurrying. The song at winter tempo has manners. It lifts feet without asking for leaps. It swings hands without threatening balance. Couples step in place. Elders sway with dignity. Children orbit each other like moths who know exactly how close to come to flame. Some songs are maps painted on air. They name turns in the pine path, places where drift means wait, where ice says go around, where the river once lied and then told the truth. A verse points north by stars that have acquired nicknames. A chorus reminds a boy that east tastes of iron at dawn. If the young roll their eyes, they still hum the melody later. And the hum finds their feet at the fork without asking permission. There are songs for mending feelings the way there are songs for mending socks. A quarrel cooled by the refrain that everyone knows arrives too soon to permit pride to continue. A widow's kitchen warmed when neighbors bring the hymn whose harmony holds an empty chair without poking it. The gratitude afterwards is measured in tea and the quiet return of appetite. Winter is full of reasons to go silent. Songs make speech safe again. Sometimes a voice carries news because words are heavy. A fisherman's wife sings from the porch, 3 notes that mean the river gave. A mother sings 2 notes that mean the fever broke. The smith's baritone rides across the lane with a line that translates to hinge mended. Hang the door. It is not code, exactly. It is a dialect that trusts the village to be fluent in each other. Old stories keep a few melodies to themselves until the longest nights. Then a ballad is unrolled that takes 3 cups of tea to finish, a mill wheel that froze and the boy who walked to the next village for a spare axle pin. A mare that pulled a sledge through a storm because someone sang the note that matched her stride. A miracle that did not violate physics, only endurance. Children fall asleep before the ending and wake convinced they heard it anyway. That is one of music's better tricks. Iron deep cold. When breath has edges, singing warms places blankets do not reach. A worker on the far side of a roof hums through scarf and picks up tempo as fingers unclench. A man crossing the frozen river keeps his line low so it won't crack the ice's concentration. A woman shoveling the well path finds that a chorus divides 10 shovels into reasonable chunks. By the third refrain she can see water thinking, by the last she can taste it. The song does not make the work smaller. It makes the worker larger. Visitors lend tunes that set like fence posts in the village memory. A peddler hums a step melody with long vowels that make the lane feel wider. A soldier returns with a march softened into a homecoming. A cousin from town sings something syncopated that makes will click faster and the cat object. The new songs are not adopted whole. They are trimmed and hemmed until they fit the room. By spring, no one can say which parts were imported and which grew in the kitchen. Silence also earns verses. After the last note, the room returns to the peck and the ticking of a cooling pot. That silence is not emptiness. It is resonance, voices laid down like logs, giving off heat in their afterglow. Someone says, "Enough," with a smile that means exactly enough. Scarves are tied. Doors open. The night's cold rushes in and retreats again, chastened by music. On the road home, snow carries a polish that remembers footsteps and refrains. Stars seem closer after singing. They look like punctuation marks approving a good paragraph. In one house, a child who did not last the third verse is carried to bed. In another, a boy tries the harmony again under his breath and is surprised to find it still intact. The stove welcomes both and writes their lullabies into brick. If spring has a melody, winter taught the throat how to find it. Songs for the long nights do not promise easy weather. They rehearse courage and proportion. When the thaw argues with roofs and paths, the same voices will answer with work that keeps time. Until then, the village keeps night simple. Tea, ember, story, and tune. Enough to feel held, enough to let sleep arrive with its own soft chorus. Ash is winter's quiet algebra. What fire becomes when it is finished saying yes. In Slavic villages, grey in the scuttle is not waste. It is a material with manners and uses, a soft ledger of what the stove has done for the house. Every morning, while the peck still remembers night, the ash door opens like a mouth that has finished a long story. A shovel slips in, angle learned by wrist, not rule, lifting the pail, sifted snowfall into a bucket that won't scorch and won't complain. Ash is a map of yesterday's fuel. Light where birch flared clean. Coarse where knots argued. Heavier when oak gave long embers that kept a child's cough easy at midnight. Women read it as bakers read bread, by weight, by colour, by what clings to the iron. If a flake of charcoal crunches under spoon, a note is made without paper, split finer today. Riddle once more before banking. Mind the damper when the wind turns east. The stove, answered correctly, purrs back into consent. First use is safety. The ash bucket waits on bricks until its heart cools past mischief. Then the village becomes an editor of ice. A tin of sifted ash walks ahead of fate. A hand shakes commas down treacherous steps, a soft grey that writes grip onto glare. At the well curb, a ring of ash persuades boots to behave. On the hill to the barn, grey spreads in a soft sash, sparing a hip from learning too much at once. Sand bites. Salt stings. Ash negotiates. It is winter's diplomacy with physics. Gardens are asleep, but memory is awake. In the yard's corner, near a fence that remembers beans and dill, a lidded barrel waits for ash that has cooled into innocence. Potash will return as green in a season that currently feels fictional. A woman lifts the lid, scatters a measured bowl, never on snow's glossy pride, but on the dark places where warmth will reach first. For cabbage, she says softly, and the barrel becomes a promise. Children carry small scoops like acolytes, learning that tomorrow is fed today in ways you cannot eat yet. Ash keeps doors sensible. A thin fur of it on the threshold begs snow to wipe its feet. A pinch thrown at a lock wakes the keyhole from sulk. A smear with a wet rag on the iron stove rings makes yesterday's spills confess and vanish. Pots blackened by honest work lose their argument under ash-soft abrasion. They shine again, not like new, but like trusted friends who have bathed. Soap, the house's winter saint, is born from ash and fat, lye coaxed from grey sifted through water. Strength tested the old way with a floating egg or the smoothness between fingers. Boiled with rendered kindness, stirred with patience that remembers wrists long gone, poured into moulds that once knew summer cheese, it cools into bars the colour of modest clouds. Weeks later, it meets laundry and hands and floors. The smell is plain and correct. A hymn without flourish, chimneys confess to ash. Thorn brooms tied and saved from summer shake soot free into the peck's throat. Ash accepts it with family patience, and the bucket becomes a genealogy of smoke. The sweep's cough at the roofline is answered by tea below. A plate with bread and salt is set on the sill, because even necessary messengers deserve ceremony. Ash marks ceremonies of its own. On certain feast mornings, a small cross is drawn in ash behind the stove, out of sight, near heat and bread, so humility can listen without needing to be seen. Before sewing, a grandmother dusts a child's palm with a touch from the bucket and says, "For steadiness." When a new lamb comes shaking into the world, a finger dipped and tapped to the brow will say, "You belong to a place that remembers what fire costs." Barns understand ash as boundary. A light scatter at the base of a wall tells ants and the curious small to take their questions elsewhere. Henhouse corners are greyed to discourage damp opinion. A coop gets a shallowish bath in a wooden tray. Hens fluff themselves into the soft and rise cleaner, smug as a choir after a good hymn. Dogs choose ash patches in the yard to lounge. Fleas prefer not to keep them company. Winter's nose also benefits. Ash catches cold smells that would otherwise haunt a room. Fish brines brag, cabbage ancestral thunder. A bowl set on a shelf near the peck becomes a quiet sponge for the day's strong sentences. Emptied, rinsed, refilled, it keeps talk in polite registers. In a world where windows open only a hand's breadth, this is a courtesy to lungs and tempers. Ash carries stories the way a ledger carries numbers. A boy, sent to scatter the steps, reads the grey for secrets. Today the stove work harder. Why? A mother answers without turning from her board. Market day. Bread for neighbours. Talk for 3 houses. A man checks the bucket and nods. We asked much. It gave much, and tilts an extra split into the peck with something like thanks. Through winter, gratitude often looks like calibration. There is ash for grief, too. When a house loses someone, the stove keeps working, but its mouth is fed with hands that tremble. Afterwards, ashes are taken carefully to the garden's sleeping edge. A line is drawn, straight, modest. Snow falls and makes it forgettable. Spring will never say which spinach leaf tasted of that winter, but the family will know kindness was added to the soil at the moment it could hold it. The ritual is not doctrine. It is a way to keep sorrow from becoming draught. Children are taught ash's mischiefs along with its mercies. Hot ash looks cool. They are shown the palm's distance test. Feel for warmth without touching pride. Wind steals ash and writes trouble in eyes. Scatter with back to breeze or not at all. Ash on a sheep's back is a joke that a grandmother will not find funny. Use it where work tells you and stories approve. In the learning, accidents shrink into anecdotes. The bucket becomes less dangerous and more companionable. When Thor threatens to carve ruts into the lane, ash offers spine. Mixed with straw and tamped into slick clay, it makes the road hold under this heavy week. The village moves over grey that used to be flames, and the sound under boots, half crunch, half gratitude, tells everyone the arrangement was wise. By the time mud rains openly, the ash has dissolved into better earth. That is the substance's character. To become help and then become invisible, night returns, and the daisish rests in the bucket by the door, cool now, a small hill of quiet. The peck is banked. Its exhale is low and maternal. A last pinch dusts the rim of the wood box, where snow likes to go when it shouldn't. Lamps dim. Outside, Frost rehearses ferns on the pane. Inside, the air smells faintly of soap and old smoke and rye. Sleep arrives. In the morning, the ash door will open again, and winter's grey will resume its modest priesthood. Ash is what remains when flame has finished its part of the argument. In the village, that remainder is never scorned. It is scattered, saved, sifted, stirred into usefulness. It blesses steps and soil and skin. It keeps memory from being only heat and turns it into structure. The blessing of ashes is simple. Nothing good is over when it is over. Winter loosens its fist one finger at a time. The village notices not by calendar but by sound. First, a single, steady drip from an eave, tick, tick, then a chorus from every roof, as if the houses themselves were practicing patience aloud. Icicles thin to glass flutes, then to hollow reeds, then to nothing. The snowbank by the well pulls away from the curb and shows a dark seam like a smile that's thinking of becoming true. No one calls it spring. They call it the softening, and they live as if a guest might arrive early or not at all. The smell changes first. Smoke loses its iron and lifts more easily. Air arrives with a faint wet sweetness. Rot, yes, but honest, like soil waking. Boots find slush that bargains underfoot. Paths remember their original curves and forget the corners winter insisted on. Ash scattered all season rises as a quiet grey ghost from the thawing lanes and disappears into mud that will reign for a while with loud authority. Women open a window the width of a hand and the room inhales like a long-suffering singer testing a higher note. Elders read the thaw like a letter from an old friend. Careful, familiar, a little messy. The river speaks in two languages at once, under-ice whum and surface chatter where water learns to show its face. Along the bank, a black ribbon appears and widens, a sash around winter's white. At the ford, men poke with poles and shake heads or nods that mean, not today. Maybe tomorrow. Take the footbridge and your pride will thank you. On the pond, the ice goes blind, white and granular, then treacherously clear, then it simply isn't, replaced by a wrinkled mirror nobody trusts yet. Birds arrive as punctuation. Rooks take the belfry like a parliament reconvened, their black grammar correcting the sky. A single lark writes an upward sentence over the pasture and finishes it with a laugh. Starlings rehearse imitations on fence posts, hinge, pump, a child's whistle, delighted with their own mischief. Even the resident crow grows conversational, as if winter had kept it too quiet for too long. Children look up with mouths open. Voices return to their throats lighter, doors migrate outdoors. Rugs, beaten with brisk diplomacy, bloom dust into sunlight. Straw mattresses sigh under sticks. Quilts air like flags of calm nations. A broom sweeps porches as if waking wood from a nap. In the yard, a table appears where fat will be rendered into the last soap, where seed sieves will be tested for mice damage, where jars will be counted and lids inspected for the season that wants what is new. Inside, the peck accepts a smaller ration. Its hum lowers from sermon to lullaby. Birches carry sweetness in their white bones. A hand augurs a modest hole. A twig spout is eased in with apology. A wooden pail waits and remembers summer cups. Sap drips clear and tastes like a rumour of leaves. Children are granted thimble sips and make faces at how honest the taste is. A jar of last year's honey lends a spoon to the brimming. A mother stirs a little sweetness into a mug of sap and calls it medicine for patience. The tree is thanked with a plug of wood when the day's gift is done. Bees test the air on the first day the sun means it. Hives are opened just enough. A saucer of honey water waits like a shallow blessing. One bee loops, two follow, then a dozen draw small gold letters on blue, spelling a word the village hasn't earned yet, soon. A child claps and is shushed kindly. This is worship, not theatre. Chickens mutter at the coop door, then commit to puddles with the seriousness of scholars. A cow leans into the sunbeam in her stall as if someone had put a shawl over her shoulders. Pantries show their bones and their virtue. The cabbage barrel sings its last soft note. Jars that once stood in ranks now stand in anecdotes. A mother counts without moving her lips. Enough beans for 2 soups, mushrooms for 1 good supper, jam for the feast that will forgive winter for being itself. Bread continues its discipline. Yeast grins in warmer air and rises with less persuasion. A single onion in a glass of water on the sill grows a green pen that writes spring on the tongue. Tools step forward from walls for their interviews. The plowshare is stroked and judged, its edge tested against a thumbnail. The harrow's teeth are counted like cousins. The scythe stays quiet in its nook but listens. Leather is oiled. Rope is uncoiled and recoiled so it remembers kindness. A shovel, warped by too many Januaries, is heated and pressed back into reason. Men stand outside discussing angles as if planning a wedding. Field first if the north edge dries. Garden second when the pump path doesn't bite. Fence posts when the frost surrenders its grip. Children find boats in bark and armies in rivulets. On the lane's crown, meltwater carves channels. Twigs become bridges. Pebbles become whales. A leaf is launched with a prayer that sounds suspiciously like a dare. Puddles are stepped in with theological seriousness, some on purpose, some accidentally on purpose. Felt boots yield to leather with a thud of pride. Mothers raise eyebrows and hang socks closer to the pec shoulder. Wind discovers cheeks that want to be brave again without scarves. Night remains a winter citizen, but it has changed uniforms. Stars look wetter, as if washed. The moon smears itself softly on thawed patches where earth breathes steam. Owls continue their work, but their O sound less like lectures. The stove, banked, sleeps a true sleep. Coals need less coaxing to confess flame in the morning. Dreams change diet. Less snow, more mud. Fewer wolves, more lambs that smell like milk and straw, and arithmetic that soon will include pastures. Their mischiefs. A thaw lies and freezes in the same hour. A step that trusted last March betrays this one. A path collapses into slush that sucks at boots like an unloved cousin. A child catches a cold from discipline forgotten. The well lid swells and sulks. These are not tragedies. They are negotiations. Ash returns to the steps. A shawl returns to a throat. The lid is persuaded with warm water and a hymn's length of patience. Some springs announce themselves with a bell. Others whisper through chinks and seams. The village lives inside the whisper and keeps its ledger honest. One fewer armful of wood. One more glance at the eaves. One bucket left by the door, just in case the night reconsiders. Good news travels like heat, felt first, named later. The rooks are back, someone says. The river is polite. The road is mud. Each sentence is both complaint and blessing when the first green dares, nettle tips under the fence. Sorrel shy as a cough. Women carry baskets as if visiting a baby. Scissors are used like compliments. Greens meet onion in a pan and become a soup that tastes of postponement ending. Men, passing, dip bread and nod the way people nod at a neighbor in a new coat. Children declare it spring and are corrected with a smile. Not yet, and yes, winter does not leave. It thins. In its thinning, the village rehearses the next grammar. Water instead of ice. Mud instead of crust. Wind that announces rain instead of snow. The hints are enough to shift the heart's furniture. Beds pushed closer to the window for morning light. Shawls folded differently. Tools arranged by the door that marches toward fields. Sleep arrives cooler, not because blankets fail, but because air has learned another KEY.B by the time the church bell rings on a Sunday with a sound that no longer wears a scarf. The village has agreed. If this is not spring, it is the handwriting of spring. And handwriting can be read, even if the author has not yet signed the page. Bread is cut thinner but tastes more. Water is colder but friendlier. Feet are dirtier but freer. The day holds two seasons in one palm and drops neither. Spring will take the village by the elbow and lead it into work with mud on its shoes. But winter does not depart. It folds itself and slips into pockets, into shelves, into the grammar of hands. Memory keeps the season not as a story of hardship, but as a book of methods. How to make warmth from order, how to stretch daylight with courtesy, how to turn patience into bread. When fields green and roofs forget icicles. The house still knows where the kettle belongs, so it will sing before worry. And the path from bed to door still remembers the angle that keeps toes from arguing. Objects store winter the way trees store sap. The peck, now modest on a diet of kindling, holds a red thought behind its bricks, banked knowledge that can swell into comfort when rain sulks for 3 days. Felt boots stand retired like veterans by the loft stair, white at the toes with salt and victory. Patched coats hang with scars that read like maps of storms survived. The ash bucket is clean and empty but stays near the door, a grey priest who may be called again. The well's rope, newly flexible, still carries the politeness of a slow lift and a careful pour. Tools go back to their warm weather stations with winter's exactness in their bones, hinges oiled before they ask, teeth counted before they fail, edges trued before they are needed. People carry winter where eyes can't see it. A mother measures flour with a restraint that tastes like generosity, because winter taught her that enough is a kind of wealth. A father ties a knot in one turn fewer than last year because cold trained his hands to make strength without waste. Children step over puddles with the balance learned on ice and return borrowed things faster than they might have, because the long nights taught them what borrowed time feels like. Elders, who read frost the way they now read clouds, nod at a wind and predict evening without raising their voices. Markets remember, too. A honey jar wrapped in straw for snow still travels wrapped in straw for sun, habit turned into elegance. The cooper's bands ring clear in April because soot taught him in January the cost of dullness. The basket maker's willow bends differently after sleeping under drifts. Its patience becomes the handle that will not blister a summer palm. Even the fiddler tunes with a winter ear. Songs hold the village at tempo that lets work and grace keep company, animals keep the treaty. Dogs patrol borders that have gone from white to green, but their voices carry winter's diplomacy, low paragraphs, honest punctuation. Cows, muscled by months of tidy routines, lean into pasture with steadier gratitude. Hens gossip in broader lanes and still return at dusk by the path their feet tamped in snow. Wild neighbours remember, too. Fox travels the crease between field and hedge with the same respectful stride. Wolves, far off in pines, sing less but not differently, as if distance, once negotiated well, stays true through seasons. The river translates winter into summer without losing meaning. Where skates wrote sparkling sentences, oars will write ripples. Where ice offered roads, boats will lend bridges. But on certain mornings, when fog clings to reeds and the surface lies waiting for decision, people standing on the bank hear a low one in memory, under ice language now spoken only inside the chest. That remembered note keeps choices cautious where pride might otherwise hurry. Rituals carry winter forward in miniature. Bread receives the sign of salt before the knife even when heat is no longer rationed. A heel is set on the sill for a traveller even when roads are polite. A spoon of last year's sour cherries crowns a spring cake not to show off, but to honour jars that sealed on a day when the window was just a square of breath. On the first rain-altered market, sand is spread on slick boards as if frost might still be plodding. Everyone walks a shade safer for the superstition. There are stories that recirculate when lilac opens. Children hear of snowmen that tilted and were set right, of wolves that stayed at the appointed distance, of a lamp carried along a drifted path that looked like a star moving on earth. These stories shrink with retelling, trimmed to the size of bedtime, but they do not evaporate. They are stitched into lullabies so summer will not mistake itself for forever. The lesson is not to be afraid. It is to be exact. Arrange yourself so the season, any season, can help. Sometimes memory is simply a gesture. A grandfather, crossing the yard in July, bends to brush ash from a threshold that has none. His hand rises with a little smile at the habit's persistence. A girl tying her scarf for sun remembers the winter knot and laughs, then ties a lighter one that still holds. A boy, fetching water without ice, pauses and lowers the bucket more slowly than he needs to, because the well deserves the old respect. These are not quaintnesses. They are good posture in time, when trouble visits in warm weather, storm, sickness, and neighbour's grief, the village answers with winter's choreography. Paths appear without orders. Tea arrives steeped to the measure that calms. A bench is moved to the wind's shoulder. A coat is found for a shaking back, even if the shake is not from cold. The peck, asked to be summer half, agrees with a loaf and a kettle. Winter's arithmetic: share, stack, sand. Sing: solves problems that belong to other months. By harvest. Winter has been translated into shelves and stories, and a tone the village uses even when baskets are heavy and sleeves rolled. If someone asks what the long dark taught, no one gives a speech. They point with their lives to a woodpile stacked so air can pass, to a rope coiled so a glove finds its tail, to a child who says after tea instead of now and gets better results. The answer is everywhere and not loud on the first morning when dew flashes like a field of small bells. A woman standing by the door recognizes winter in the angle of light on the table and in the way her hand reaches for the kettle before the list of chores. She breathes and names 3 things to thank from months gone: bread that always rose, paths that never closed entirely, and voices that sang instead of shouting. The naming takes a breath and gives back 3. Summer can begin, and when next autumn slides its copper into the hedges, when rooks arrive with their parliament of remarks, when smoke resumes its governance of air, the village will not change as much as it will reveal a shape it never lost. Tools will move to their winter hooks like birds returning to a branch. The peck will lift its shoulders. The well will don its lid like a thinking cap. Children will look taller because memory will be standing inside them like a good spine. Eternal winter memory is not a shrine. It is a toolkit. It keeps houses from beginning at 0 each year. It keeps kindness near the door. It keeps fear small enough to be taught good manners by bread and song. The forest will grow hoarfrost again. The river will teach its low grammar. The stars will move to their strict winter positions. The village will answer with what it has practiced: warmth made, water honored, work tuned, voices braided. And night will nod, satisfied, because it recognizes its friends. Before winter, the forest became a ledger and the villagers its careful accountants. Each log stacked against a wall was not just wood. It was a counted evening. Men walk the boundary where pine meets birch, testing trunks with the flat of an axe handle, listening for the hollow note that meant weakness, the tight ring that promised steady flame. Birch for the quick catch, pine for the long glow, a little oak or beech for the deep ember that would still remember its duty at dawn. Sleds creak home under neat cords of wood, the runners whispering across first dustings of snow like quills across paper. Houses of logs wore the winter like armor. Their corners, dovetailed, tight, held back the hiss of wind that combed the eaves. Between the courses of timber, moss and tow were tamped with patient thumbs, an old craft that made walls breathe without leaking warmth. A door opened and shut with the politeness of a library. Beyond it, the great stove, pech, waited with its square dignity, clay-bellied and brick-shouldered, a domestic son. Children knew its warmest bricks by heart. They touched them with the backs of their hands as if greeting a relative. Lighting the day began with the stove's first language, kindling arranged like a small argument that would soon be resolved into agreement. Birch bark curled into soft scrolls. A wisp of straw. A pine slat laid with the grain. Then the match, its sulphur a brief bright letter in the dim. The first exhale of smoke found the flue, and the house sighed. A woman leaned in with the attentiveness of a healer, reading the flame as it learned its work. She adjusted the damper a finger's width, and the fire's voice answered, lower, rounder. A promise rather than a boast, smoke wrote thin sentences in the morning air, blue where the burn was sweet, darker when resin asked to speak. Neighbors read those lines the way they read tracks in snow. Ivan has wet wood. Someone might murmur, and a boy would be sent with an armful of drier splits. No shame in the errand, only habit. The village rooftop became a quiet parliament of plumes, each chimney a member with a tone, a widow's low, steady ribbon. A family with many children, brisk and cheerful. The smithy, darker at first, then clean once the bellows found their breath. The peck did more than heat. It was a room inside the room. Bread rose in its mouth, the dough covered with a linen that smelled faintly of summer flax and winter soap. Porridges thickened in iron pots set to one side, where heat kissed not with flame but with patience. Mushrooms, threaded on twine and hung high, remembered autumn forests and gave it back as fragrance. Apples wrinkled peacefully on racks. At night, someone, Grandfather Bones, a fevered child, a mother with an infant, slept on the warm top, under a quilt sewn with scraps that had known 3 weddings and 2 journeys to market. Heat here was not only comfort. It was medicine and calendar and lullaby. Logs entered the house as strangers and left as family. Each was split at the block with a rhythm older than anyone present. Lift, place, breathe, strike, then the crack, a clean syllable. The grain of wood revealed its history with every split. Summers tight, winters generous. 1 year of storm when the tree had leaned into its own patience and grown knotted. Children were taught to stack with the same ethics they were taught to speak. Face the cut to the wind if it must dry, leave a corridor for air, keep the pile honest and ready. A poor stack was a quarrel postponed to a cold night. A good one was a future made visible. The smell of smoke became the household signature, woven into wool coats, braided into hair that dreamed of summer even in winter. To outsiders, perhaps, a sign of hardship. To those within, a perfume of safety. When guests arrived, they were welcomed first to the stove, hands held above the open mouth until feeling returned to knuckles and stories climbed out of silence. A splash of kvass or hot milk. A slice of rye rubbed with garlic and salt. A spoon of jam that tasted like the color red had survived the snow. Not all smoke rose. Some told its secrets in the chimney soot. On a still day, a man climbed the ladder with a bundle of thorny brush, dropping it down the flue to knock loose the winter's black. Children watched from below as flakes drifted into the firebox like an odd snowfall. Soot meant warmth banked and debts paid to the cold. It also meant vigilance. A dirty flue was a danger no one romanticized. Fire was friend, sometimes priest, never fool outside. The woodpile wore its own roof, a shrug of boards and thatch that kept snow from turning the split faces to stone. Birds learned the corners where spiders wintered. Cats memorized those lessons. When the sun found the stack southern cheek, a small thaw ran like a vein, and someone, almost always a child with hands too small for the heaviest work, would turn around to catch it. This was not a chore. It was a game with rules the adults rarely bothered to explain. The rules were in the hands already did I end the evenings. After chores had been patiently folded away, smoke changed key. It thickened just after supper, then thinned as the pech settled. Shadows stretched and simplified the room. The stove, red-hearted, told a humming story of the day back to the family. If someone had spoken sharply at noon, the brick seemed to smooth the edge of that memory. If laughter had run over itself while the bread was in the oven, the heat stored an echo and returned it as comfort. An old woman would sometimes place her palm on the brick and say she could hear the future arranging itself. Children believed her, because the brick was warm. Snow outside made the logs chime differently when struck together, cold ringing the pitch higher, deep cold turning it thin as glass. Men learned to read temperature by sound, mouths lifting in a smile at the exactness of it. Women heard it too, and in the morning adjusted the dough or the simmering time by an instinct everyone pretended was science, but which was love measured in minutes. The stove's face became an altar on certain nights, a candle before an icon, a sprig of dried herb tied with red thread, a bowl of grain for the spirits of field and wood. Not every house kept the same rites. Not every rite was spoken of as sacred, but the peck gathered them all patiently, the way a river gathers streams. Heat held the meanings even when words did not. Storm days were the stove's happiest work. While wind wrote its furious script against shutters, inside the peck wrote its round answer. Windows filmed with frost that a child could draw on. A sun, a hen, a house with smoke just like the real house. The old told stories that matched the weather for dignity, of a winter when the mill wheel froze singing, of a mare that broke trail for a whole village, of a ring lost in hay and found in soup. The fire punctuated the tales. Crack, pop, sigh, like a trained musician who knows when to enter and when to be quiet, and in the quietest hours, thick night. Snow closing the ear of the world, the stove kept vigil. A last stick slid in with care. The damper found its sleeping position. The ember bed glowed the color of patience. Breath became the house's only noise. On the warm top, someone shifted in dreams. The logs, which had once lifted wind, Now lifted sleep.by morning. Ashes told the night story. Light where the wood had been quick, heavy where it had been stubborn. A thin bed of coals still held a secret crimson at the core, and with a practiced stir, fire returned as if it had never quite left. Outside, the woodpile waited, a bank that paid interest in heat. Inside, the Pech planned another day of bread and porridge and rumour and song logs and smoke with a grammar by which winter could be written legibly. They turned the forest from threat to ally and the house from shelter to hearth. In their rituals, split, stack, light, bank, sweep, lay a civilization of patience, warmth not as spectacle but as daily craft, smoke not as stain but as signature, a peck not as appliance but as quiet heart. Snow does something merciful in a forest. It simplifies. The high canopy of pine and spruce becomes a vaulted ceiling of quiet. Trunks stand like pillars with their dark bark banded in white, and between them appear corridors, paths that are less made than revealed. Villagers do not force these paths. They find them, trim their edges with habit, and return often enough that the snow learns their names. Before wheels sleep for the season, before deep drifts harden, a few careful sled runs press the first lines, setting the grammar the village will use until spring. The earliest hour is best for reading the way. Night has tightened the surface into a crust that will hold a footfall like a polite host. A lead walker steps and waits, listening with souls. Is it the good CRRK of sound snow or the tired sigh that means the layer beneath is rotten with yesterday's melt? One pace becomes 2, then 10, then a rhythm. Behind, a sled slides in a hush, its runners whispering to the grain of the cold. A rope bites mittens, then loosens. A child rides under a quilt that smells faintly of smoke and dill. A dog sketches his own annotations at the margin of the script. Paths avoid arrogance. They choose the gentle bend, the shallow saddle between small rises. The lee side where winds quarrel has already spent itself on the other face. Even in the straightest section, the line bows a little, acknowledging roots and stones it has known for decades. A new boy, eager, suggests a shortcut. His father smiles and points at a spruce whose low boughs have the yellow edge that means the wind scours there. Not today, the father says. The forest teaches the kind way for the long winter. The boy nods, pretending to understand. By February he will, trees speak to travelers in a language of wait. Pines hold snow like monks hold silence. Firs shrug more often, letting sheets slide with soft wafts that startle no one after the first week. Birch, with its white skin, wears snow poorly. It looks feverish under the load, so the path gives birches space the way one gives a friend with a cough more room on the bench. Branches arch to form doors that ask for a bow. Hats learn modesty. Sled poles are lowered without complaint to in the narrowed world of winter. Distance is measured in sounds. A woodpecker's clean clocking means a rotten trunk ahead. Good for tinder but bad for leaning a sled. A far fox's yelp tells of a crossing at the old stone boundary. The dog's ear ticks, then folds back into agreement. Snow falling from a bough in one heavy body warns of the warm eddy where breath will linger unhelpfully. The path slides left to keep lungs mild. Somewhere a river talks under ice, liquid gossip beneath a thick tongue, and the way curves to find the safest crossing. Reeds thickening, willow roots like stairs, markers grow modest and true. A ribbon of bark peeled last summer and tied high, where deer cannot worry it. A twist of straw on a low branch that catches light just enough at dusk. A little shelf cut into a drift at a junction, smoothed each time someone passes, so that even in new snow the mind remembers which hollow belongs to the road home. In a white forest, red and blue lie. They belong to cheeks and smoke, not navigation. Texture and habit are the map makers. The path is also a school of silence. Voices shrink not by rule but by usefulness. Breath wants to work, not talk. When words come, they are the vocabulary of winter. Edge, hold, give, bridge, break, rest. A mitten lifts to say halt. A wrist rolls to say swerve. Two fingers tap a forearm, listen. The snow answers, a little squeal under sled steel that means frost has deepened since morning. A velvety hush that means new flurries are sweeping in. The fine hiss of needles shaking above, wind negotiating with crowns long before trunks feel it. Children learn to read paths as if they were books from which letters sometimes fall out. A track vanishes under drift and reappears 2 trunks later. A teacher points not with a stick but with a foot, setting it confidently on the invisible line. Trust the lay of ground, she says. Trust where men and deer agree. At a fork, tiny, deliberate footprints stitch from one side to the other. A hair zigzag, writing safety into snow. Remember how fear writes, and uncle murmurs. We do not need to copy it, but we should be able to read it. All the winter's errands use these ways. Wood is fetched in disciplined loops, out heavy, back light, then out again with sled empty to carry the next neighbor's burden. Grain sacks trade houses. Jars of pickled mushrooms travel like letters. A borrowed tool rides in the lap of an elder who insists he is only out to feel the weather's teeth. On Sundays, paths merge toward a wooden church, the steeple's hoarfrost glittering like a candle's breath in far sun. Bells do not carry far through heavy snow, so people walk by the clock of light, a dawn milk, a stove's first hum, a pail's ring, then time to go. Wolves exist on a different paragraph of the forest. Their paths are parallel, farther off, written in a syntax of caution and hunger. The villagers' ways respect this, skirting thickets where the wild prefers to wait. Men tie a bell low on a sled not to be brave but to be courteous. We are here. We do not stalk. Women tuck bread crusts into aprons to toss for birds at a customary stump. Attention buys attention. Trouble wanders less near places where living things are seen and, quietly, addressed, light edits the same path into many moods. On high blue days, sun finds the crystals on the trail and writes in glittering italics so bright that eyes half close in delight. Children drop to their knees to push sleds by hand just to ride the spill of sparks. On pewter days the world flattens. Trunks approach without shadow and the way is kept by memory alone. Then the smallest marker, a knotted reed, feels like grace. In fog, breath becomes the forest. The sled's lead rope turns into the only sentence one must read without error. People move closer. The hush that falls is concentration. Not feared at tea times the path shifts by necessity. A bent pine, overburdened, lowers its brow across the way. 5 hands lift in unison, brushing snow off, easing the bough up and propping it with a young trunk cut for the purpose. No one curses the tree. The tree has worked all night holding sky. In thaw, a low place in the trail, trustworthy since November, slushes to treachery. A man moves 3 steps to the ridge and presses a new line with his hips and hope. By afternoon, it is as if it had always been there. The forest forgives edits done with good penmanship. Night travel is rarely chosen, but sometimes winter schedules it. A birth, a fever, a message that cannot wait for dawn. Then lanterns stitch a moving embroidery down the corridor between pines. Each light a small argument against the cold. Snow reflects the amber into faces, makes everyone look like saints from old icons, solemn, intent, surrounded by halos of breath. Sound travels differently in dark. A far crack is big news. The dog's low growl is a paragraph that must be understood at once. Paths at night feel like bridges over sleep. When the door opens at last and warmth grabs the first arrivals by the shoulders, the corridor outside collapses back into mystery. Spring will steal these ways almost overnight. Tracks will sink. Water will choose its own roads. Cart ruts will reappear like old lines in a palimpsest, and the forest's grammar will change to mud and birdsong. But winter paths keep their citizenship in memory. In August, someone will step between 2 pines and feel in the soles the ghost of a sled's groove. A woman will set a basket on her hip and realize her body has chosen a bend the snow once taught. Children will draw roads in dust that curve exactly where January demanded courtesy. The season writes itself into bodies that way, not as an order, but as a rhythm that returns when needed. For now, the corridor is good and the day is kind. A cluster of cones skitters across, tumbling like small jokes. A jay scolds, then reconsiders and hushes because the hush is too beautiful to break. The sled's rope yields and tightens with the breath of those who pull. Somewhere ahead, The village well waits with its iron ring and its bucket, and the stove waits with its red patience, and the bread waits with its quiet sunrise in the oven's mouth. Between them and here there is only this: pines, snow, a practiced line, and the slow, human choreography that keeps winter from being merely cold and makes it, instead, a place. Autumn in the Slavic forest is a careful arithmetic done in baskets and jars. Long before the first hard whiteness seals the fields, the village leans into its slow harvest of what the woods will give and what the gardens can spare. The work does not rush. It repeats, the way prayer repeats, until even the smallest hands know the order of things: gather, sort, dry, salt, seal, label with memory. Mushrooms come first in the calendar of urgency. They rise like brown and gold punctuation after warm rains. And families fan into the trees with woven baskets on their arms and a lexicon on their tongues: porcini that smell of bread, chanterelles that carry apricot dreams, honey mushrooms clustered like gossip around a stump. Knives flash small, precise, respectful. Each cap is checked for worms' handwriting. Stems are trimmed into neat coins. Back home, the air becomes a hymn of steam and butter for a day. Then the racks take over, mushrooms threaded on linen cord, hung over the pech to sigh themselves dry. Their flavors concentrating into winter courage. Berries, too, are a lesson in patience. Blueberries stain fingers with dusk. Cranberries wait longer, stiff and tart, almost winter's own kin. They roll like bright beads into clay bowls. Lingonberries, small and stubborn, promise to outlast every candle and keep their color when snow makes the world monochrome. In kitchens, women stir pots that breathe sweet and sharp, adding sugar that remembers last year's cane and a squeeze of lemon guarded for this moment. Jars line up like soldiers on a shelf, lids clicking shut in a ceremony of tiny victories. Each one is labeled not with ink but with a story. At the birch near the hollow, on the day the deer crossed the stream. With aunt's laughter. From gardens and fields come the roots, beets still wearing earth like a cape, carrots bright as small suns, parsnips with the quiet authority of old songs. Potatoes, lifted from their dark rooms, rest in sacks where breath can pass. They will be asked for again and again until the first peepers sing in spring. On a clean table, knives move at the pace of care, peel, slice, stack. The hands remembering the angles learned from women who learned from women who learned from the land's hard vowels. Cabbages become architecture. Heads are halved and cored. Leaves are salted and pressed in barrels where stone weights sit like wisdom. The first day, the brine barely speaks. By the third, it whispers. By the seventh, it sings the old sour song that means winter will have its grain. Dill crowns join, caraway seeds argue politely, slivers of carrot make little flags through the pale world in the barrel. Children peek and wrinkle noses at the healthy funk, then sneak pieces with growing delight. Sourness is an acquired inheritance, and this is how it is acquired. Honey is tucked away with a reverence that is half right, half relief. The bee skeps, their summer streets now less crowded, give up comb that smells like every flower day braided together. Wax is melted and strained for candles. Honey settles into glass where it thickens to amber, a sunlight that can be spooned like medicine at the first cough of January. A small jar is set aside with a red string around its neck, wedding honey, or for a child's fever. Or for the old man whose teeth remember too many winters and need kindness now. Salt is winter's second son. Barrels are scrubbed and blessed with scalding water. Fish, river gifts, are laid with its crystals until they promise to keep their sweetness. Cheese curds are pressed and salted into rounds that will slice like comfort on the bluntest day. Meat, seldom and therefore cherished, is cut in modesty, the best for feast, the rest for the smoker where alder and applewoods teach fat to answer to flavor rather than to time. Smoke curls into the rafters and writes a thesis on patience. The tools of storage become as important as the food itself. Lids are tested for honesty. A loose thread of steam betrays a poor seal and earns a reboil. Cellar shelves are wiped with vinegar and pride. The window ledge becomes a cold frame for apples that will shine through frost like a lantern's tiny moons. In the corner, Sacks are set on slatted boards so no damp memory rises from the floor to kiss them into rot. Mice are warned off by sprigs of mint and the gaze of a cat whose whiskers write strict sentences across the dark. All this is work, but it is also social gravity. Neighbours help neighbours. The barter is practical and affectionate. Your mushrooms for our honey. Your pickled cucumbers for our late apples. A day at our churn for a morning at your smoker. The currency is labour carefully given and carefully remembered. There are lists in heads, none written, and none needed. Winter will reconcile every debt with cups of tea and plates brought across snow with mittens steaming. Children participate with unglamorous authority. They rinse cranberries in 3 waters until the 3rd runs clear. They carry firewood to feed the peck's long appetite through the hours of boiling jars. They label with drawings, berry, mushroom, fish, so that even in candlelight and sleep-soft eyes, a hand will find the right comfort on a hard evening. They are paid in spoonlicks, in stories of the last winter when the road shut for 5 days, in the right to turn the heavy stone on the barrel and listen for the first bubble of brine. There are omens that people keep but do not swear by. If the last mushrooms are abundant, the first snows will be gentle. If the bee's comb is thick-walled, the river will close early. If apples keep their snap in the cellar past the church's winter feast, the spring will open a week sooner than pride expects. The villagers shrug and then act as if both omens and prudence have equal right to seats at the table. You cannot eat prophecy, but you can eat what you put away today. When dusk falls earlier each day, the village begins to look inward. Windows glow against chilly air that smells like leaf fall and distant smoke. The last gleaners return with baskets that sound like small thunder as the handle taps a hip. The yards, once shaggy with summer's life, tighten into neatness. Tools oiled and hung, sleds checked and leaned, a broom against each doorstep as if to brush winter's feet before it enters. The pond, black and reflective, memorized the sky's fainter stars, waiting for the first skin of ice to pull over it like a sheet. Inside, jars cool under folded towels that trap heat long enough for confidence. The pop of a ceiling lid is applause in miniature. A woman smiles at the sound as at a clever child. On the peck, a pot of buckwheat groats releases its warm, nutty breath. Pickled mushrooms, just tested from a new jar, meat onion, and dill in a little dish that tastes like both forest and persistence. Kvass fizzes low and agreeable in a corner. The house's modest music. Be why the time frost writes on the windowpanes. The village has written its answer in shelves and hooks and barrels and stacks. The first long cold will not be a question. It will be a cue. Hands will know where to go in the dark. Feet will find the path to the woodpile without needing the moon. The peck will accept what it is offered and return the gift multiplied in heat and bread. And when a knock comes late and snow-dusted, there will be a jar that can be spared and a spoon already looking for neighbour's bowl. Gathering before the freeze is not only about hunger's future. It is a grammar of confidence. It says, "We saw the year's generosity and kept it kindly. We humoured the forest and it humoured us. We laboured in low light so laughter could find us in deep night." Winter is long. Preparedness makes it shorter in the heart, which is where length most often matters. In winter, bread is more than food. It is a gentle verdict that the day can be endured. Before dawn, when frost is still writing its private alphabet on the window, a woman wakes the house with flour. The bowl, the same broad-mouthed vessel that has learned generations of hands, comes down from its shelf with a soft wooden sigh. Flour pours like pale snowfall. Salt follows, small and exact. From a crock kept near the warm shoulder of the peck, a spoon finds yesterday's living leaven, sour, sweet, alive with the memory of 100 loaves. It is folded in with a little warm water, and the mixture breathes. Kneading is a conversation with time. Palms press, fold, turn. Press, fold, turn. The dough answers by changing from shaggy to supple, from stubborn to willing. On cold mornings it asks for patience. On damp ones it asks for flour's quiet counsel. Knuckles know when to insist and when to stroke. Children watch from the bench, learning without lesson. Listen with your fingers, their mother says, and they try, small brows furrowing as if a story were being told in a whisper they must catch or lose. The peck plays its part with the composure of an elder. Long before dough meets heat, yesterday's embers are coaxed into morning, then fed with the careful ladder of kindling, split log, and heartwood. The fire is not violent. It climbs like noon. Soot clears its throat. The draught becomes clean. The brick brims with stored day. When the heat is right, tested with a handful of flour tossed on the hearth to bloom quickly and brown, ash is drawn to the side, and the oven's mouth becomes a halo of working warmth. Rye is the village's winter friend, darker, denser, full of a quiet strength that lasts to afternoon. Wheat is rarer, a festival guest that makes loaves as pale as good news. Buckwheat gets its turn as a partner, folded in for flavor that tastes like nut and smoke. Into the dough go secrets that travel through families. A spoon of caraway for clarity, a ladle of warm milk when a child has been thin, a heel of old bread soaked and added back to teach the new loaf good manners. Sometimes a little mashed potato, to keep the crumb tender and the memory of the autumn field close. Proofing is a hymn to slowness. A linen cloth, flour dusted, honest with small stains of work, lies over the bowl. The dough rises by degrees you could set your heartbeat to. First a lifting, then a roundness, then a dome that remembers sky. In the corner, the kitchen's other songs keep time. A pot of kasha clicking against its lid, a kettle beginning to think of whistling, a child's low song to a cat that pretends not to listen. When a two-fingered press in the dough's side springs back slowly, it is time. Hands shape the loaf with an affection that is not embarrassed to be practical. The seam tucked tight so the loaf will not sulk. The top smoothed and floured. Sometimes a cross cut lightly, the superstition of blessing, the practicality of expansion. A peel slides under. The door opens. Heat kisses cheek and brow. Loaves enter the peck as if into a chapel. Hush, purpose, a good promise. The door is sealed, and the house changes key. Even snow tapping at the shutter seems to settle. Waiting has its chores. The table is cleared of flour and given its cloth. Butter is set out so it will soften without complaint. A jar of pickled cucumber blinks its green eye from a shelf. The knife is sharpened. Long strokes, not many. The room smells like a farm in summer and a forest in autumn, pulled together by yeast into a soft congregation. Outside, men pass with armloads of birch. A sled's runners make their old song on the path between pines. A dog shakes crystalline air off its coat. Inside, the oven's heat travels into brick, into bone, into the small unspoken courage of those who will step back out soon to tea the right moment. A moment a clock can miss but a nose cannot. The loaf is drawn. It comes out burnished, a brown between chestnut and barn door, its side speaking a crisp language as the crust contracts. The house hushes to listen. A wet brush flicks over the top for a glossy skin, or a towel is wrapped for a softer sigh. The loaf is set on its side so steam will run gently and not pool in one corner. Someone, often the oldest, sometimes the youngest, knocks the bottom with knuckle. The sound is hollow, honest. The verdict is, yes, the first slice is ceremony. Not the heel, that is for later, to be toasted on a fork at the mouth of the oven, but a modest center cut to test the crumb. Steam escapes like a prayer, touching faces, fogging spectacles, softening the world. Butter meets warm bread and forgets that it was ever stiff. Salt remembers why it exists. Sometimes garlic is rubbed on a crust with the stern kindness of a winter doctor. Sometimes honey is allowed, a thread of stored summer drawn over a surface that accepts it with gratitude. The tongue, poor creature, can say little except oh. Bread is not solitary. It attends to soup, beet borscht reddening a bowl in January's quay, cabbage she with its good sour that wakes the mouth and remembers barrels and stones, mushroom broth that tastes like autumn saved in a jar. It anchors meals that would otherwise drift, a slab with fried fish on a Friday, a slice under a quivering egg on a slow morning, crust broken into a cup of warm milk for the child whose teeth and patience are both coming in. Bread listens to fat and salt and stories. It steadies sweetness. It greets vinegar like an old friend it once argued with and now respects. Crumbs do not go to waste. They are swept into a jar and returned as thickener to soups or as crispness to cabbage pancakes. The last dry heels stack in a crock and are reborn as kvass when warm water and a spoon of sugar persuade them to fizz and forget their age. In a village where winter is a long guest, generosity is measured in the uses found for small remains. Bread teaches this without words, the way a stove teaches patience by glowing. Rituals circle the loaf. A cross is traced over it before the knife. A slice is set by the window for a traveller not yet arrived. A heel is saved for a man on the road, even if he has not walked past in 3 months. On feast days, salt sits on a carved wooden dish beside the round loaf, and a newcomer is welcomed with bread and salt, which says more things at once than speech can manage. We wish you health. We honour your hunger. We ask for your peace. On quieter days, a mother will tuck a piece still warm into a pocket to comfort a child's first errand alone. Bread also times the day. We'll go when the second loaf is baked, means 2 hours of knitting and a story. We'll talk after the dough is set, means a conversation that will be kinder for being half an hour delayed. On storm afternoons, the yeast becomes a barometer. If it sulks, the weather is changing. If it flirts, there will be clear sky enough to fetch water without argument. And in the night, when the house wakes to a sudden quiet or a dog's sharp word, someone will touch the covered bowl, feel the living dome, and be consoled, even in darkness. Something is rising. Children learn the ethics of bread the way they learn to tie scarves. No tearing wastefully. No mocking a plain slice. Say thank you to the hand that baked what you eat, even if the hand is your own when you are older. They learn the games too, carving faces in the soft end of a roll with a thumbnail, pressing the crumb into little animals that stare from the plate, testing how far butter can be spread before it must be admitted that it was too much. They will be scolded lightly and kissed anyway. Bread takes care of such contradictions. When loaves cool, the house returns to ordinary light. The oven is brushed, the peel set back on its nail, the cloth shaken and folded, the bowl rinsed and left upside down to drip. The day resumes its thick, necessary tasks. Outside, the path will need a scrape. The well will need its ice broken. Wood will need carrying and stacking. But now the village walks with a cushion in its chest. Hunger has been given an answer that lasts until night, and at night. A heel brought close to the fire, toasted until its face freckled dark, buttered and sprinkled with a little salt or sugar. Tastes like the word enough. It is not abundance. It is sufficiency. In that sufficiency sleeps the wintering heart, warmed by the quiet arithmetic of flour and time, fire and attention, patience and hands. A village survives winter not only by bread and fire, but by a circle of stones with a dark center, the well. In autumn, men reset the curb, stones shouldered back into tightness, gaps chink with moss and clay so drifting snow won't sift into the throat. The sweep's long arm is checked for cracks. The rope is dressed with tallow so frost will argue less. The bucket's iron band is tightened until its voice rings true when tapped. By the time the first real cold arrives, the well looks like a small fort, lid fitted, hinge honest. A broom leans nearby like a watchman's spear. Morning begins with the sound of ice being taught its manners. A woman lifts the lid and meets a thin pane, glass grown in the night. The dipper's back knocks lightly around the circle. A chime, then a splinter, then the satisfying surrender as the skin breaks and black water blinks awake. Breath feathers the air. Mittens learn the choreography of winter drawing. 2 turns to settle the rope. A slow descent so the bucket won't hammer the wall. A short pause to fill without froth. Then the long, careful lift. 1 arm for muscle, the other for guidance. When the bucket's lip clears, the well exhales a scent older than roofs, cold stone, iron, and a sweetness that has nothing to do with sugar. The first pour is for the house, into a pail that lives by the stove, where frost evaporates into the hum of daily work. The second is for animals, a ladle for the dog who sits politely, a basin for the hens who drink like chorus girls, quick and identical, and a larger share for the cow who leans her winter head into the steam as if reading tea leaves. What remains is a cup, a clean enamel, held with both hands, sipped in the yard. It is not luxury. It is proof. The tongue tastes slate and snow and the shy mineral of far hills. The body files the knowledge. We are supplied, children accompany as porters and as students. They learn to step wide of the puddle whose edge will glaze into treachery by afternoon. They learn that a rope speaks, dry, a scratch, iced, a hiss, and that the smart hand warms the hook in a pocket before returning it to the peg. One is given the glorious job of sanding the path, a tin of grit shaken in even commas down the white. Another guards the empty buckets from snow's curiosity. Their pay is a sip from the dipper and the right to watch their breath turn into little clouds that seem, for a second, to be alive. The well is social as much as it is practical. Voices meet here and braid, news measured with smiles, a recipe swapped like a secret, a worry said small enough that the air can carry it away. In heavy weather, a man will haul for an older neighbour before his own pails are full, and no one keeps the arithmetic except everyone. On feast eves, the sweep's arm lifts so often that the rope grows warm from handling. Laughter rises like steam from the ring of stones. Not every morning is easy. Sometimes a hard freeze thickens the lid from the inside. Then the knocking becomes work, and patience stands where strength runs out. Coals and a shovel are carried like a small sun to soften the stubborn ring. Snow is banked around the curb as insulation. The rope is stretched near the stove and told a story while it thaws. Once, midwinter mischief snaps the bucket's bail and the iron hand falls away. A boy retrieves it with a fishhook and a string, trembling with the seriousness of the task. When the metal clinks the stone and climbs back into light, 3 houses cheer softly as if a patient had taken a sip after fever. The well keeps ceremonies the church does not mind. On the morning of a blessing, an evergreen sprig is dipped and shaken over heads and thresholds, water falling like bright punctuation. When a baby is carried past for the first time, a grandmother touches its brow with a finger wedded here, so you will remember thirst early, and gratitude earlier. On the longest night, a ladle is poured back into the throat, for the river under the road, someone says, and no one laughs. Water teaches thrift without scolding. You plan the day to carry fewer pails, soak beans before you sleep, simmer porridge low, use snow for washing floors when the clean drift is honest. You store the fetched water where the stove will keep it from icing, but not so near that it will sulk and taste of smoke. You cover the pail to keep it from gossiping its heat to the room. You ask dishes to accept a hotter water and less of it. You do these things quietly, and winter becomes less of a judge and more of a partner who appreciates good bookkeeping. At dusk, the well becomes a small lantern as frost crystals on the curb catch the last light. The sweep shadow stretches long, pointing as if to tomorrow's errands. Someone, often the same someone, walks out for night water, so morning will have one gift waiting in the dark. The rope whispers, the bucket returns, a lid settles. The circle sleeps, but not entirely. Beneath, the black patience of water holds steady under the ice, as if storing the village's breath. Iron spring. When the lid is light and the rope squeaks with mischief instead of stoicism, the well will taste different, softer, leaf-tinged, not so stern. But winter is where it earns its place in the village's memory. You can live without sweetness for a season. You cannot live without this arithmetic of lifting and pouring. Fire cooks. Bread comforts. The well decides. To draw from it is to agree to the day with your hands. Before sunrise, the village learns a quieter alphabet. Frost writes it on every surface. Thin ferns climbing the window panes, feathery ribs across the pump handle, a milky bloom on the axe head that makes steel look thoughtful. Sound enters this script carefully. Footfalls change voice. The packed path offers a tidy Sierra Sierra K, while loose powder answers in a whisper like will rubbed between fingers. Even the breath of people becomes visible grammar, commas and ellipses drifting from scarves, sentences that dissolve kindly before anyone can regret them. Roosters do not shout in this cold. They negotiate. Their calls are shorter, bright coins tossed into a sky that is still counting stars. Cows answer the morning with a bass note the pech seems to recognize. The stove, as if in sympathy, gives a settling sigh. From the smithy, he always rises earliest. A single ping rings out, not the clamour of work, but the test tap that asks whether iron will behave or sulk. Somewhere a door unlatches and relatches with a respectful click. Winter's version of knocking before entering, frost makes a bell of small things. A twig bumped by a mitten rings glassy for a breath. The well's iron handle speaks with a thin, polite squeal that tells of night's grip easing. A wooden bucket carried against a coat thumps a heartbeat into the morning. Steady, modest, reassuring. Farther out, at the forest's first line of trunks, a fox plants its feet with the delicacy of calligraphy, writing a brief poem across the path a child drew yesterday with a stick. The poem will be read and erased by noon. Children are masters of this hour because they do not expect it to be louder than it is. They listen with noses and cheeks. Frost stipples their faces into apples. They giggle once, then hush instinctively, not to be told, but because quiet amplifies wonder. A girl presses her ear to the pech's warm flank and claims she can hear bread thinking. A boy puts his palm to the window and feels the glass speak frost into his skin. A cool lesson he will forget only after he has remembered it all day. Elders read the frost's grammar as weather. A pane crossed by fern-like leaves means dampness rose and froze. Snow soon, they say, tying scarves without hurry. Straight spears on the north window promise a hard, bright day. Axe will bite crisply. When the pump handle's frost blooms thicker on one side, the wind has chosen its mischief. Paths will drift there, so the first person out carries a broom like a banner and redraws the village's lanes with gentle edits. No complaint is necessary. The morning is all instruction. Inside, voices are moderated by brick and wool. The stove keeps its deep vowel. Kettles add a high consonant that grows into tea. Mothers switch to winter register. Soft orders, patient repetition, fewer words at a greater distance. Scarf, they say, and a scarf appears, wrapped while a second mitten is coaxed from under a bench. Slow, they say at the door's threshold, meaning both mind the ice and let the day arrive. Fathers step outside first to cough respectfully into the dark. As if asking the yard's permission to begin. On the road to the barn, the snow's crust remembers last night. It holds long enough for 3 careful steps, then gives with a shy sigh under the 4th. Boots adjust. The rhythm of walk becomes winter's music. 2 crisp notes, 1 soft, a rest. 2 crisp, 1 soft, a rest. Lantern light throws a honeycircle ahead, an oculus cut in the blue. Inside that circle, hay breathes hay, leather smells like old journeys, and animals become a choir of low, reasonable comments about the weather. A cow snorts steam into a halo. Hens mutter solidarity. The barn cat, decorated with frost on whiskers like sugar on a holiday bread, inspects a hole and decides nothing will enter today that she did not invite. From the frozen river comes a voice like a distant door opening and closing. It is the ice remembering water. Cracks chase each other in long, patient races under the surface. A deep one rolls under the banks and climbs the birches as a tremble. Men hear it and call to mind the safe crossing, the caution tree, the place where reeds never lie. Boys hear it and grin. Ice speaking is winter bragging about its strength. Elders squint and add a finger's more sand to the path up from the river stairs. The sound is both invitation and warning, the best kind of speech. The village dog patrols the perimeter with a vocabulary more exact than any clock. 1 low woof for a fox, 2 for a neighbour coming early with news, a sharper syllable for a stranger sled. He leaves his messages at approved posts, the corner of the woodpile, the stump by the well, then returns to flop by the peck's ash drawer, where his ribs rise and fall in 4s, the metronome of morning calm. Children imitate him indoors, woofing quietly as they tie laces with thick fingers that haven't remembered finesse yet. Breakfast speaks in steam. Kasha releases a nutty breath. Tea rehearses its little storm under the lid. A spoon against a clay bowl ticks like a watch. The first slice of yesterday's bread, toasted face to the fire until dotted with small brown freckles, carries butter that forgets it was ever cold. A clink as someone sets salt on the table is almost liturgical. Conversation sits low. Plans are small and clear. Wood, well, barn, path, school. A mother's last instruction, if the wind begins to scratch at noon, come home. scratches itself lovingly into a boy's hat. When the sun finally shakes itself free of the trees, frost changes politics. It leaves the south eaves first, dripping in delicate metronomes that convince birds the world may yet be kind. Icicles speak mathematics, counting in drops along their tapered lines. The road, swept and sanded, answers boots with the agreeable crush that means errands will be honest and not heroics. Two old men meet at the well, hats off for the sun as if for a priest, and compare the morning syllables: the pump squeal, the stove sigh, the good Sierra K underfoot. Agreement is reached. It is a day that will hold. Not every voice is sweet. The gate complains where its hinge has thirst. Someone promises oil. A sled runner squeals against a dry plank. Grease appears. A shutter bangs once, rebuked by a nail. The nail is bent back into reason. The village keeps house with sound as much as with tools. Small repairs hush small irritations, and the hush accumulates until the place feels tended. The way a face looks different after being listened to. By noon, winter speaks brighter, louder. But the hour of frost voices will have done its work. The day's music is tuned to kindness. Ears are awake without being tired. Feet remember where the road thickened and thinned. If trouble comes, wind or message or sudden fever, the memory of morning's careful grammar will make answers gentler and quicker. Voices in the frost teach this, that the world is comprehensible when met at the right volume, and tomorrow, before light again, the village will step into that blue chapel once more. Someone will breathe a visible amen into the air. A rooster will toss a coin of sound. The ice will open a door and close it. The peck will hum its psalm. And the frost, with its fern and feather, will draw on the window, the same old text, somehow always new, inviting anyone who cares to read. Winter is a tailor whose fittings are never finished. In Slavic villages, warmth is not an accident but a garment assembled from animal patience and human hands. Fur where wind bites most, felt where joints argue, wool where breath needs to pass and not escape. Before snow locks the fields, women and men consult the year's wardrobe like carpenters checking beams. What held? What sagged? What must be mended? What can be turned inside out and asked to serve again? Fur is the winter's front line. Rabbit line the world's edges. Mitts, ear flaps, the soft collar that forgives a too sudden gust. Fox, rare and proud, warmed the neck of a bride or the bones of an elder, its flame-coloured memory of autumn worn against the grey. Sheep, patient summer grazers, stepped forward as coats, pelts that remembered grass even when the paths were only white. Furs were not fashion. They were agreements with weather. Each piece was cut to ask the least of the animal and the most of the wind. No drag for snow to grab, no loose strip to invite frost's teeth. Felt was the quiet genius. From carded wool, hot water, and work that counted time in songs, came sheets that were not woven but persuaded, fibers locking arms under the palms until they became one. Boots of felt, Valenki, stood by the door like squat saints. They were dumb in the best sense, not arguing with cold, simply refusing it. Inside them, a foot felt like a secret kept. Felt insoles travelled from boot to boot. Felt mitt liners made leather honest. Felt pads under buckets and kettles softened the iron's conversation with floor and table. A circle of felt under a sleeping child's head turned a hard night into tolerable weather. Wool was the conversation between skin and air. Thick sweaters whose patterns remembered rivers and fences, shawls the size of patience, scarves that learned the art of being a door, opening to let breath out, closing before wind could enter. Women spun in the shoulder of the peck's light, dropped spindles whirling like private planets, then plied yarn on wheels that hummed a note the stove approved. The rhythm, draft, twist, wind, was as consoling as bread rising. It measured the room's quiet and gave it back as cloth. Sewing had its winter grammar. Stitches ran short and stout where strain would visit, longer and confident where movement asked for kindness. Seams were felled with a habit that came from mending harness. No edge left to fray, no ridge to chafe. Needles were counted like coins, their eyes bright as lanterns. When one snapped, the room paused as if a small bird had struck the window. Silence, then a new needle threaded with breath steadier than before. Thimbles, dented, inherited, Wore the thumb story in small moons of brass. Mending was a philosophy, not a chore. A glove that lost a fingertip grew a new one in a shade slightly off. Honesty made visible. A coat scuffed at the elbow received a patch shaped like a leaf, stitched with a thread strong enough to restrain memory. You split wood there. Turn your arm next time. Children learned their first geography from knees patched like islands. Elders wore coats like atlases, oceans of original cloth, continents of careful repairs, roots of winter written in darning. The hat was a house for the head. Ushankas folded down like resolve, their ear flaps tied under the chin when the wind insisted on rudeness. Under a simpler cap, a kerchief caught sweat before it could betray warmth, linen in autumn, wool by deep winter. Mothers tied children scarves in knots that could be untied by mittens alone. No teeth, no tears, autonomy stitched into the morning. A boy's first lesson in dignity was learning to wrap his own neck so that no inch of skin testified against him, leather worked in service to fur and wool. Mitch shells, greased with tallow. Boot tops that shrugged off wet snow. Belts that held layers where bodies would rather sprawl into laziness by the stove. Grease and wax were winter's polite armorers. A rag, a tin, a half-hour bent over a seam could turn a week of chores from punishment to tolerable duty. The smell, warm fat, clean hide, a hint of smoke, became part of the season's perfume, as welcome as bread. Inside garments were arrangements of air. Linen held heat's first breath. Wool caught the second. Outer layers argued with weather and won. Children learned the order as a song: skin, shirt, sweater, coat, and forgot it only once. On that day, a mother's hands became a school, the shirt's hem tucked in, the sweater's cuffs pulled down, the scarf crossed and tied not like a present but like a promise. No speech was needed. The body remembered, clothing kept chores human. With fur at the wrist, water could be hauled from the well without fingers filing complaints all day. With felt on feet, the barn's packed snow floor became a path, not a threat. With wool across the chest, the axe's handle felt like wood, not winter. A seam that sat wrong could sour a morning. A seam that sat right could reconcile a person to shoveling the same drift for the third time. Craft did more than comfort. It edited the mood. Ceremony wore winter's best as grammar wears a poem. On feast nights, a shawl with a border like a river settled on a grandmother's shoulders. A felted vest embroidered with red thread made a father taller without arrogance. Children's caps acquired pom-poms, moral little sons. When the church bells insisted through the snow, the village walked out in procession. Browns and greys stirred with a few careful colours, a moving icon of patience. In the entryway, melting snow made a dark rug bloom into islands. Boots arranged themselves respectfully, steam lifting like the last arguments of cold from the ankles of the day. Nothing was ever wasted. Wool clippings became felt coasters. Hide scraps became thongs. A strip of fur found its destiny as a teapot's collar, keeping the spout from chilling a paw into complaint. Even the lint from carding, soft as rumour, stuffed a doll's chest or a pair of mittens for a boy who insisted his fingers were brave. Old shawls became swaddles. Old swaddles became polishing cloths. Old polishing cloths became tinder. Generosity and thrift shook hands until they forgot which was which. Wardrobes had voices. The knock of a boot heel on the threshold said home. The hiss of a sleeve sliding into a coat said outside. The small applause of mittens meeting at the well said together. When garments failed, they announced it in gentle dialects: a cuff that fretted, a seam that sighed, a buttonhole that yawned. The village listened and answered with thread. Every repair postponed a new purchase. Every postponed purchase strengthened the invisible weave of winter's economy. Time and care in exchange for warmth and dignity day-night. Garments rested like tools, hung where heat would not bully them into brittleness, within reach of the hand that would rise at the first draught of trouble. Children slept with their hats at the bed's foot, as if ready to leap up and rescue the moon. A mother's last act might be to turn a damp mitten inside out and smooth its seam with the same tenderness she had used on a brow at noon. A father's last noise might be the soft click of the awl being set down, the coat's patch finished. The family's weather improved by a square hand's breadth, when spring's first puddles came. Felt boots stood like retired soldiers, white at the toes with salt and victory. Furs were brushed, aired, whispered to as they were put away. Moth and time warned off with cedar and blessing. Shawls were folded into squares of quiet. But in the bones of the village, winter's tailoring remained. The knowledge that warmth can be made, not begged. That comfort can be arranged, not bought. That a seam straight and firm can change the day's sentence from complaint to work, from work to song. Winter asks for meat with a voice too honest to ignore, and the forest answers only if approached in its own grammar. Quiet feet, patient eyes, and respect that survives both hunger and success. Men rise before the peck has finished remembering night. Bread is cut without clatter. A heel is rubbed with garlic and tucked into a pocket with a pinch of salt. A rope is coiled, a knife honed to the humility of sharpness, a birch-bark horn tested with a breath no louder than a thought. Outside, stars sit like frost that forgot to fall. Snow is both page and pencil. Tracks are not decorations. They are sentences that must be parsed before a single step is taken off the path. Hare writes in zigzag clauses, two small prints, then two heavier, then a skip that says fear. Fox writes a tidy cursive that wastes nothing. Elk writes in pillars, steady as a church hymn. The hunt begins with reading. Which lines are this morning, which are last night, which are stories already turning into history. A mitten lifts, and a boy learning the trade nods, moving his weight from heel to whole foot. The way silence walks, the forest breathes differently in deep cold. Pines exhale a resinous sweetness when touched by sun. A distant branch reports a dry crack that tells of frost entering deeper than yesterday. A jay scolds, always scolding, but the pitch matters. High for a passing shadow, low for humans who forgot to bow. The hunters listen with more than ears. A shoulder feels wind threading the needles. A cheek measures the air's edge. The tongue catches a tin note that means river ice nearby is speaking under its mask. Snares are the winter's modest arithmetic. Set where a hare's narrow road squeezes between two saplings, they are loops of patience taught to tighten only when asked. The lesson for the boy is not metal and knot, but placement, a palm's width from yesterday's print. 2 fingers higher when new snow deepens the tunnel. A feather brushed across the path to erase the human comma no animal forgives. Each set snare is a promise to return, whether it has paid or failed. The forest hates debt. Farther in, where spruce crowds out sky, the world becomes a chamber of breath. Here, a man may stalk on skis, long, quiet bones, gliding the way memory glides over an old grief. Poles do not jab. They whisper. The body is not a spear. It is a shadow that decided to learn courtesy. If luck and judgment gather in one place, a roe deer steps into the small clearing where light survives. No shout, no drama. A clean shot taken because clean shots are the only ones allowed. The deer folds like a sentence finished without flourish. What follows is the real hunt, gratitude heavy enough to carry. A hand rests a moment on the animal's warm neck, an old rite without priest, spoken in breath. The work is exact and unhurried. Snow is cleared, a top spread, the knife doing its bright, brief duty with the decency of skill. Nothing wasted. Hide promised for mitts and patches, sinew for thread, bone for broth, fat for the pan and the leather. Meat is cooled to the forest's key, parcelled for neighbours who will not ask but who will be remembered by the path that leads to their doors. Sometimes the hunt is a decision not to take. Elk stand like winter-made pillars, breath pluming, eyes black as wells that stayed open in a storm. The wind is wrong. The snow lies treacherous. Calves are too young. Or simply, the old men say this with a shrug. The forest says no. Then the men lower rifles that did not rise and watch until the animals walk back into their text of trunks. The boy learns a wordless word. Enough. Predators have their own treaties. Wolf keeps his distance, parallel and polite. Raven arrives first to news and last to leave opinion. If sign suggests hunger near the village, men adjust the map. Fires at the edge, paths made noisy on purpose, a bell hung low on a sled so that the wild hears. We are here. We bring no chaos. In years when cold stacks its weeks too high, A haunch is left on the stump beyond the last fence. Call it superstition or policy. Either way, the night comes out right more often when pride is quiet. The river is a second classroom. Under ice, fish flash like stray thoughts from warmer seasons. Men open a round window into that world with an auger and patience, then rest a hand on the edge to read currents through skin. A line lowers, bait simple as a promise. In good hours, fish rise with the meekness of gifts. In lean ones, the whole reflects a face learning again how to wait. The boy discovers that cold can be friend or judge depending on the angle of your shoulders. Returning is its own ceremony. Packs ride heavier, but feet lighten as roofs appear. Smoke riding home in small grey sentences against white. Dogs meet first, tutored by noses. Women read the men's faces as carefully as any track. Success, failure, a right decision carried like an invisible pelt. Meat is hung high in the cold shade. Tools are wiped, warmed, and put where hands will find them tomorrow. A small piece, fried quickly with onion and salt, is eaten standing at the stove. The forest shaking hands with the peck at a tea table that night. The hunt is retold in a key that will let children sleep. Distances shrink to kindness. The shot sounds like a sigh. The cold is praised for keeping the meat honest. A portion goes to the widow before anyone chews twice. The boy is allowed the last word. Not a boast, but the correct naming of the wind at the moment that mattered. The elders nod. He has read the page. When sleep comes, it smells of resin and iron, of wool and a little blood, of snow that refused to squeal because feet were careful. Outside, under constellations that have watched every winter before this one, the forest resets its sentences. Fox writes a clean line past the snare that did not fool him tonight. Elk bed in the low place where wind is shyer. A raven lifts his head and counts roofs. The hunt will begin again at an hour that dignifies both hunger and humility. Winter makes classrooms that no bell can summon. Before chores finish and after chores begin, children step into the wide white and discover a country that answers to speed and laughter. Snow, which hushes adults into thrift, invites the small to spend breath, balance, imagination, recklessly and somehow wisely at once. Boots squeak a bright COK. Scarves bloom with frost. Mittens learn new grammars of grip. And the village's edges soften into a playground where caution and courage shake hands. Sleds are the first scriptures. A hill hardly taller than a roof becomes a pilgrimage. Lines form, treaties are struck, ruts grow glossy as river ice. Wooden runners, rubbed with tallow or the secret onion slice, carry bodies like arrows and minds like birds. The best path curves around the birch stump and lands just shy of the well-sanded lane. Those who stray discover the theology of snowbanks, merciful but opinionated. Falls are recorded in laughter and wiped from history with a mitten. Though legends remain, here, where Petya flew, someone will say in spring. Pointing at a patch where nothing now remembers except the storyteller's grin, snowmen arrive as brief citizens. 3 spheres negotiated by small arms and the laws of friction. An old scarf promoted. A carrot drafted. Coal from the peck's ash drawer shining like borrowed stars. They stand in front of houses as if to greet travellers, grow philosophical hats in new flurries, lean into wind with the valiant folly of kings who know their kingdoms are made of weather. When Thor tilts a smile into a smirk, children adjust the mouth, learning that maintenance is a kind of love. The art of snowball diplomacy develops quickly. Rules migrate from last year. No stones, no ice, no faces, and the mitten that hits first helps the mitten that's wettest. Forts rise wherever 2 drifts consent to be walls. Loopholes are poked with brooms. Flags are invented from handkerchiefs the wind adores. A siege lasts until the cook lifts a window and waves. Steam rolling, a slice of bread held high like a treaty. Armies dissolve into citizens with crumbs on their lips. Already plotting alliances for after tea, skates appear when the pond's grammar hardens. Blade strapped to boots, buckles quarrelsome, strap stubborn, turn clumsy ankles into confidants of speed. The first steps are proofs of humility. The second day is better. By the third, a figure 8 risks itself across the black. And a child who yesterday pronounced the ice mean now pronounces it friend. Elders watch from the bank, listening to the pond's deep whum and the thin ring of blade on glass. Ready with rope and calm voices if the season negotiates a crack into the hour, paths between houses become chalkboards. A stick writes hopscotch in the powder. A broom erases mistakes kindly. Rules adjust to boots. Hop, step, slide, laugh, repeat. The smallest child, bundled until mobility is a theory, is granted a sledge thrown and pulled in loops that spell their name. Bells tied low on the rope announce royalty. Dogs escort with democratic enthusiasm. On corners, older children stamp maps. Meet here when the sun touches the mill. Trade the sled for skates at the third bell from the church. Tell Masha the secret of the fast slope, but not her brother. There are quieter games that look like chores. A girl carries a pail of clean snow inside and returns with a bowl of maple brown syrup cooled into candy. Winter alchemy, practiced with solemn tongues. A boy sands the steps for his grandmother, making commas of grit at each rise. Later he slides on them himself and nods, satisfied with his text. Tiny feet pack trails to the barn. Tiny hands line up kindling as if laying rails for toy trains. The line of play and help blurs until both feel like belonging. Voices in winter carry differently, so children learn volume the way they learn balance. Shouts crack the air and run too far. Whispers stay warm and behave. Here becomes a mitten wave. Wait becomes a foot planted sideways across the path. Look is a shared stillness, chin lifted toward a crow banked like a scrap of night. The snow listens to these new literacies and approves by keeping secrets. The shortcut through the spruce. The ledge behind the shed where icicles grow like cathedral organs. The shallow dip where the wind never quite wins. Clothing turns mischief into science. Scarves crossed and pinned mean hours outside. Scarves loose mean 20 minutes and a lecture about ears. Mittens on strings, threaded through sleeves like red patience, prevent tragedies the pech would otherwise have to dry with sighs. Felt boot tips whiten with salt like badges of honor. A patch on a knee says both fell well and mended better. At day's end, boots stand in a muddy crown on the mat, hats steam into halos. And socks, arrayed like fish on the hearth's rod, rediscover warmth the way stories do. Slowly and with applause. The forest edge is both invitation and border. Children approach in pairs, rules tucked under hats. Do not enter without older feet. Do not shout where the trees hold their breath. Do not throw at crows, who are listening on behalf of someone else. They name trunks as if naming friends. Stripe, birch, old soldier, pine. Lady brush, spruce that sheds elegantly at the lightest tap, and return home with pockets of fir cones. There seems sticky with resin that perfumes the house long after fingers forget to be sticky. Snow teaches time. Morning is for fast. Afternoon is for forts. Twilight is for listening. As blue rises from the drifts and windows bloom with rectangles of amber, games quiet into parliaments on sleds, judging the day's best slide, best save, best fall. Stars appear like coins tossed for luck. Someone's mother calls a name in a tone that is not urgent and not negotiable. Last run, a child announces with the confidence of kings, and the village grants it. Last runs belong to winter's law inside. Cheeks glow with the moral authority of cold well-met. The peck approves with a bass note. The kettle hisses. A slice of bread, toasted and rubbed with garlic or brushed with honey, certifies the day. Stories are traded. The hare seen near the fence, the fort that turned into a ship, the snowman who learned to bow. Sleep catches them already halfway there, heavy-limbed, loose-handed, hair ringing with frost memory. The house tucks them in with smells, wool, smoke, soap, that sweet mineral hint on their collars, proof of the pond's FOG.IN years ahead. They will leave the village or inherit it. They will carry water and debts and infants and grief. But the winter will have laid down a foundation that resists erosion. How to fall and get up. How to share without counting. How to read a surface. How to hold breath for the precise second a turn needs. How to go home when light says so. Snow is school. Laughter is its pen. Childhood, here, is the text that refuses to melt entirely, even when every drift is gone.